Good evening. Noting the time and the presence of quorum, I'd like to reconvene this meeting of the Acton Select Board. It's now 7 p.m. on July 11th. We will start, as we usually do, with residents' concerns. If any resident wants to raise any issues that are not addressed in the agenda, please step forward.
Good evening, Alyssa Nichols, 76 School Street, but I am speaking to you tonight on behalf of the Green Acton Water Committee. We have a few questions that we hope can be answered either during tonight's update or at a later date. As many of you, or perhaps all of you, are aware, the Boston Globe reported that there was a PFAS issue in Winchester due to wastewater treatment plant sludge as a likely source of contamination. So this led several of the committee members to wonder whether or not the sludge from our Fort Pond wastewater treatment plant on Adams Street in South Acton is tested and where it is sent, what it's used for, acknowledging that there is a cost for PFAS testing. It also led us to wonder whether or not the influent flowing to the wastewater treatment plant or the effluent discharged is tested for PFAS, because we're aware that recently you approved some discharge from the South Acton wells with the Acton Water District. And that the Acton Water District has expressed an interest in such testing. And if that's not being done, we're wondering why not. And just wanted to take the opportunity to let everybody who's listening know that we also looked into the black earth compost at the transfer station, and black earth compost on their website, they actually don't use material from wastewater treatment plant sludge, and they also test for PFAS, and those tests, the most recent ones, are well under the reportable limits, so we don't want to cause any alarm unnecessarily by bringing up this issue to the public. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill Clower, Piper Road. Coming tonight to ask the board about the design of the intersection of River Street at School Street. The reason I'm doing this is because there's been some preliminary markings put out in front of the church, our church, and I notice other properties in the neighborhood, and I'm just wondering what the public process is here, because I have not seen anything advertised. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else anyone online? Okay.
There are no hands raised.
Yes, there will be. Okay. So we will I'll speak with the manager, and he and I will speak about those two issues that have been raised by the residents. And we will get back to you. Town manager update.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank all the staff throughout the organization who worked hard to close out the fiscal year. We're July 11th, so 10 days ago we closed the books on FY22, and it was a good year. We achieved a lot of goals and didn't spend the whole budget, which is a good thing. So and I know there's a lot of work that goes into closing out the fiscal year that's still going on in this building and throughout the organization. So I just want to recognize all the staff that are working on that right now. I also wanted to just mention that there is we are starting the wastewater solutions and the water resources study that was partially funded through ARPA and partially funded through a town meeting article from a few years ago. We are starting that right away, because it's an issue that needs to be addressed as quickly as possible. And we look forward to sharing results from that with the board and the community, hopefully before the end of the year.
Thank you. We'll go around the board and see if anyone has any member minutes. Jim.
The Acton Climate Coalition has been sponsoring a series of meetings at 10 in the morning on Wednesdays next to the amazing Twin Seafood of West Acton. And I know what the upcoming topics are. On July 13, they're talking about electrifying your lawn and landscape care. On July 20th, they're talking about Acton businesses acting on climate change. And on July 27th, there's a special after-hours event, not at 10 a.m., but instead at 4:45, talking about heat pumps and mini splits. And that'll include information on how residents can get free consultation from the folks of Abode Energy Management, paid for by the town of Acton, if they're thinking of electrifying their homes. One other environmental thing. So the town of Westford has been engaged in a lot of climate efforts that similar to Acton's. And so they've invited me on the 13th of July, this Wednesday, to come talk with the Westford Climate Action Network and the Westford Sustainability and Clean Energy Committee at 7 o'clock. If you want more information about that, you can go to westfordclimateaction.org, and that'll be a Zoom event. So yeah, you can stay in Acton. You don't have to travel all the way to Westford to hear me talk about what Acton's been up to. That's it.
David.
Thank you. I just want to let everybody know that last weekend, a week ago, I attended on the Friday the Boston International Asian Music Festival at the Thomas E. Tidman Amphitheater. And it was a great event, really well attended. Maybe there were about 500 people there, great musicians. It was a lot of fun. And this past Friday, I attended a groundbreaking in Manor for the Assabet Co-op Market. It is not very far from the Acton town line and will be part of the Powder Mill corridor improvement. But that also was very, very well attended, and people are pretty excited about having the co-op market. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Imogen.
Thank you. Just wanted to note that Jennifer Freeman, our director for the West Acton Library, retired, and so just wanted to give her a shout out and thank her for her years of service. That's it from my end.
Thank you. I have, John has a follow-up. Oh, John.
Sorry, I just wanted to note that the new speakers for this room are installed, and it's through a lot of hard work from the IT folks led by Mark and Matt Frost. And when you use the microphone, make sure you push the button and get as close to it as you can. And I hope that the audio for the home viewers has been improved, and I think it has.
Thank you. So I have two pieces of bad news. A longtime town employee, town volunteer, Larry Keena, passed away. Larry was very involved for years with the Kelly's Corner initiative and also the Economic Development Committee. He was somebody that you could always rely on to take excellent minutes and notes and do a lot of follow-up. And he certainly was a presence, and he'll certainly be an individual that we'll miss as a town volunteer. The second piece of bad news, I'd like to report the passing of Louise Watkinwich, otherwise known as Louise Watts. She and her husband Peter ran Watts TV of Maynard, West Acton, and North Acton for many years. Louise, although she did not do a lot as far as a volunteer with town government, she was very involved in many other activities, primarily related to the Acton Lions Club, and certainly was a presence there for many years, including being the King Lion for quite a while, and very involved in all sorts of other activities revolving around site preservation, and very much involved with the Mass Lion's Eye Research Foundation. Again, she will be missed as a longtime resident. And with that, we will move on to our first piece of business, public hearing. The Acton Select Board will hold a public hearing on July 11th, 2022 at 7:10 p.m. in the Francis Faulkner Hearing Room 204 at Town Hall, 472 Main Street, Acton, and virtually at actonma.gov/meeting/BOS on the application of David Bamforth, 20 Sonar Drive, LLC, for site plan special permit under zoning bylaw section 10.4 at 115 River Street. The applicant proposed to reconstruct an existing warehouse building with a new modern storage facility. Application materials and how to participate remotely are available online at Acton Town Hall, http://acton-ma.gov/dsweb/view/collection 14984. I think, Jim, I believe you're the select board member assigned to this. Let you lead off.
Just wondering if we happen to have any planning staff present here to go through some of the technical stuff?
Yeah, Kayla Sawyer, our assistant planner, is with us to help with this review.
I can give you a brief overview while we're waiting for Kayla. This is one of Acton's strange little parcels. As you're driving along River Street, you'll see a house right next to River Street, which is on this parcel and is not proposed to be changed. The driveway then extends over a bridge over the river to a backlot where there is a gigantic abandoned warehouse and some remaining paving. And the basic proposal here is to replace the abandoned warehouse with a similar warehouse of the same size, but all new, with solar panels on top, improved paving, and it would include room for storage and room for the office use that would be pertinent to that storage use. Take it away, Kayla.
Hi, good evening, Select Board. This is Kayla Sauer with the Planning Division. I know the applicant is here, and I think they were anticipating presenting. Is that something you would like to go through first?
Yes, please.
Do you know who it is? Yeah.
Kayla, could you repeat that name?
Let me pull it up. Oh, I see them entering now.
Thank you.
Good evening, James Downing from Howard Stein Hudson. We're the project engineers for the project. Can everybody hear me this evening?
Welcome.
Great, thank you. So as mentioned, we have prepared a presentation to go through. So I will certainly share my screen with everybody. All right, can everyone still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So again, good evening. My name is James Downing from Howard St. Hudson. We're the project engineers for a project. Joined this evening by Dave Bamford from 20 Stoner Drive, LLC, who's the applicant, and also by Joe Geico from DC Bean Construction, who are the contractors. Here to present the site plan special permit for the project located at 115 River Street. So just as previously mentioned, here we just have a locus map just of the unusual shape of the existing site today. The red line work here currently shows the property line. As you can see, River Street is just located along this property line where we have an existing house out front with also another detached garage. We have the 4 Pond Brook that bisects the site. And then in the rear of the site, we have the large pre-engineered existing metal building. Here's a quick overview aerial image of that. Just going to zoom in closer. River Street is up here on the top of the plan. And then we have the existing house with garage next to it with the driveway access to the rear along here, crossing over a bridge, and then coming into the existing paved parking lot. Then with the existing pre-engineered building running parallel to the MBTA tracks to the south here. Just a quick few photographs of the existing pre-engineered building. As you can see, it's met its life expectancy here. One loading dock on the left-hand side. We have 2 other roll-up doors on this side, pavements in various stages of disrepair. Then this is a few images of a few drawings of the existing building. This is the west elevation again. Pretty straightforward, standard pre-engineered building. The east elevation, the south elevation, and then the north elevation. I got some photographs here just of the access into the site. This one here on the left-hand side is the, as soon as you pull in off River Street, the existing building is not located here on the left-hand side. We can see the bridge in the background here. And then the existing parking lot in the rear. The second image is just taken from that bridge, just again showing what the access to the rear of the site. This image here is showing the west elevation again with the northern elevation. And then this last photograph is just the rear of the building. This plan is the layout and materials plan for the proposed development. Again, coming in off River Street, plan north, looking to maintain the existing 2-story structure that's there today. Also, the existing shed and garage will remain. Same driveway configuration, looking to just do a mill and overlay on the existing driveway as it comes into the rear of the site. And then again, maintaining or reestablishing the existing parking lot out here. The proposed parking lot is currently for 23 spaces, and there's actually a reduction in the impervious, the pavement that's currently out there. This beige area represents the proposed building. And as previously mentioned, the proposed building is going to be with the same footprint as the existing building. It'll be a slightly taller building. And then moving on, it'll be, there's a better image of it. So again, this is coming in the driveway into the parking lot. You can see the 1 roll-up door. So the loading dock will be removed. This is the only access for the storage within the building with 2 floors. So it's certainly an improvement over the existing structure. Here's an isometric of the building. And in this isometric, which is useful, you can see this beige brown color on top represents the proposed solar panels that would be located up on the roof. As previously mentioned, some of the other improvements to the building, there'll be no gas used to heat this new building. Heat will be provided by solar and electric. There will also be a new fire suppression service that will be brought in, a new fire suppression line that will be brought in from River Street to the building. And also an on-site existing septic field will be removed, and a new sewer connection all the way out to the sewer in River Street will also be installed. And then lastly, this green representation down here is our underground stormwater infiltration system. All of the roof runoff, which is in this beige area here, will be collected in roof leaders directed towards this underground system, which is a chambered system, open bottom chambered system So recharge the groundwater elevations, and then the drainage or the rainfall that will land on the proposed parking lot will be collected in a series of brand new deep zone catch basins, of which will be directed to what we call a water quality unit. This water quality unit will remove additional silts and small fines, leaf litter, greases, oils prior to making its way to the brook. I should mention too, there is no existing stormwater controls on site today. Everything just sheet flows off the site, so there will be a significant increase, a significant improvement to the stormwater system. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions the board and public may have.
Jim.
Thanks. Your presentation was entirely consistent with what Kayla talked with me about, who was updating me on the plan. I only have 3 questions that have come out of that, and 1 observation. So one thing we noted was that you have more parking than you need. You apparently had earlier calculated the parking based on an office use and a warehouse use, but since the office use is part of the warehouse use, you don't need that much parking. It seemed to me that having less parking there would benefit you in terms of saving on costs and would benefit the town in terms of having less impermeable surface. So just wanted to know what your thinking was on that. Do you want to save some money?
Certainly not. Go ahead, Dave. I'll let the applicants answer that question.
Hi, everyone. I'm the owner of the property. And yeah, we've done some analysis to kind of determine how many employees we think will be on the site. And we currently think that number will be 10 or less, which would take up about half the parking spots. So we think the current number that we have should be a good amount and leave us with some spares as well, and allow us to just have plenty of parking for any occasion that might come up or any reason that we might need additional ones. We did, I believe, do some reduction in impervious surface. But yeah, we just determined that this was a good number. I think part of the reason for maybe having the parking lot be the size it is to also make sure that there's enough open space for a fire truck turnaround as well.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, Acton currently doesn't have a bylaw that allows us to cap the maximum amount of parking, but it's something we've talked about. And finally, one more question. If you end up with too much solar capacity, let us know, because we're looking into places where community solar systems could be installed. And it might be a nice win-win for you guys in the town of Acton. This is not part of the permitting process, but if you do, as you get closer to figuring out the solar, let us know if you're interested in, being part of a community solar system.
Yeah, that would certainly be of interest. I guess maybe a bit of background just on this project, just quickly. Initially, when this property was purchased, I believe about 9 or 10 months ago, and the initial plan was to renovate the existing building and just use the existing structure. But once we got into it, we initially did a study to see if the existing building had the feasibility of having solar on the roof. And unfortunately, being a pre-engineered building, they're built with such fine restrictions on, or not restrictions, but so finely to what they need loading-wise, that the existing structure wasn't able to support the weight of solar. And that was really what initiated us looking into building a new building. And has led us down the route of building a new building that has better insulation, a better roof, will be ran completely off of electricity. We won't even have gas going into the building, and will allow us to remove the existing oil heating system that's in in the building. So we're pretty excited about the opportunities that a new building allows us environmentally.
Thanks. The only other thing I wanted to make sure that you had seen was the memo from the water department noting that your proposed piping increase from 1 inch to 4 inch is going to cause you just one heck of a water impact fee. And that they thought that, a 1 inch line should provide you with plenty of water and plenty of pressure for what you might want to be doing there. So just want to make sure you were aware of that before you did too much, digging.
Yeah, it's certainly been something that we noted, and I believe has been passed along to our engineers. So we really appreciate that note.
Great, that's it for me. I guess as a general comment, I would say the planning board wrote a memo that described a number of issues that were minor and technical that they thought would be fine to be treated as conditions in the permit. And I agree with that assessment.
Thank you. Questions from other members of the board? David?
Yes, first I just wanted to note that Lou Levine has his hand up. I think he's the attorney for the project. So I don't know whether you want to take him after me or before me.
Okay. Why don't you go first?
Okay. Do you have one tenant in mind here? Or are you leasing this out to multiple tenants?
Yeah, the interior of the building is certainly being configured with one tenant in mind.
And the storage is for the associated business for that tenant or any tenant you might have?
Yep, that is correct.
And which is the greater use of square feet, the storage or the offices?
The warehouse space is the majority of the square footage.
Okay. And the last question I have is for Kayla, what is the reason for the site plan special permit? Is it the fact that offices are being added to the site or just the fact that this is being redeveloped and it's a non-conforming use?
Yeah, that's a great question. What triggered the site plan special permit was the paving of the parking lot along the left-hand side. It was over the square foot requirement that triggers the site plan special permit. I think it's 1,200 square feet.
Thank you.
Imogen.
I just have two clarification questions. So you, and actually Jim also touched upon this, but you talked about the domestic water service and the fire protection water service. I was wondering if you could go into more detail about that.
Sure. So the existing building today does not have a fire protection service. It is unsprinklered. In the proposed condition or build condition, we are seeking to bring in a fire pipe. We would connect into the existing water main that's on River Street and bring that from River Street all the way into the new building. Prior to getting to the foundation of the new building, we would tap off with a domestic service, so that would serve your bath facilities, sinks and whatnot, but then the fire protection service would continue into the building. So we're also looking to, we got some comments from the fire department too, looking for a hydrant as well. So we'll also be setting a hydrant on the site as well to be within 100 feet of the hookups for the fire department.
Thank you. Mr. Levine, I believe you had your hand raised.
I've turned on his mic.
Yeah, thank you. Oh.
Hello.
Yeah, as the board notes, this is in a light industrial area. There are only 3 light industrial areas in Acton. One is Craig Road. The other one is at the intersection of Conan and Main Street, which is basically where Christmas Motors is. And this is the 3rd light industrial area, which is made up of this site and the Acton pumping station to the left as you face the site. So what I think you have here is a rehabilitation, redevelopment of a site, just bringing it into 2022 standards. Right now, it's an older building that reached its life, but we're replacing it not only with a new building that has fire suppression, but we're, controlling all of the runoff. We have an order of conditions from the Conservation Commission. We're going to solar and this is, I think, the kind of redevelopment in the discrete areas that the town would hope for. And I know this team has put a lot of work to make it work from an environmental standpoint. And I think it's the site plan confirms that. And I would ask the board just to approve it tonight. And I appreciate the board's questions, but I think the plan speaks for itself as a good plan. And it's just basically replacing in kind what was there before. And the Board of Appeals acknowledged that when they granted a variance last week. And so I think everyone understands what we're doing here. And we're just really improving the site. We're not doing anything else.
Okay, thank you. Any comments from the public?
Clower, Piper Road. I'm wondering about the size of the line that you said would be going in supplying the fire suppression system. And I was there close to 60 years ago when the previous mill burned to the ground. We had no fire protection down there back then. During my 40 years in the department, I don't know what we've ever done to upgrade anything down there. So I just hope that as you plan for the future, that you ask for the moon right now, because we might need it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Curtis. I just have a question. If you have considered the impact on the river with construction that big, if there would be an impact. And also, just probably because I'm a nurse, I was thinking of the firehouse and what impact that might have on their ability to get out with so much construction, and equipment. I'm just curious if that would be an issue, because it's right there. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you.
That's all.
And yeah, I'm happy to respond to both of those. We've gone through the process of meeting with Conservation Committee and have gotten their approval for the project. We're making considerable upgrades to the site to help make sure that the building's long-term impact on the brook is lower and safer than it's ever been before. And during construction, we'll certainly put in all the typical protections used, especially when working this close to a waterway, silt fencing, and all those typical tools that are used. Related to maybe, it sounded like kind of disturbance to traffic in that area and how it can maybe affect, safety, emergency vehicles from going down the road. But we certainly don't foresee any impact on traffic on that road. I think it's safe to say that there's enough room on the property in the parking area and in the open area for construction vehicles to be able to get it off the road immediately without causing any major impact to the flow of traffic. And I'm sure that if it was ever seen that there was going to be a significant impact to traffic on the street, especially impact that might affect emergency vehicles. To protect the proper processes would be put in place to maybe have a police detail or make sure that the fire department is notified. So I think I hope that answers the questions.
Thank you. Fran.
Just to clarify, you're building the new space. It's the same. You're building in the same footprint. Is that right?
Correct. The new building is the exact same footprint of the existing structure.
And I just wanted to say the design is lovely. It'll be a nice thing to gaze through the woods.
Thank you. Yeah, we're certainly excited and went through the process of meeting with the design review board, and they were very happy with the change of colors compared to the existing structure that's there.
Great.
Okay, any other discussion? Board members, David. Yes, Mr. Levine.
Thank you. I just wanted to just reiterate that we have a order of conditions from the Conservation Commission that deals with, all of the work in its riverfront area, requires erosion controls, et cetera. So those issues have been addressed and will be addressed during construction. I think what David said, there's plenty of room to build here, but to the extent we do any work in the public way, we'd be required to have a police detail. If anything, this site is set further back from the road than typical construction would be. So I think those issues have been addressed. Like I said, this team has put a lot of work into this project and hasn't hastily come in here. That's why the design looks as good as it does to you, because they've improved on the design throughout the process. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. So, Kayla, do you have any follow-up remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the applicant pretty much covered it, and thanks to Jim for calling out that they're mostly minor issues that the planning division and the third-party engineer GCG found. We both feel comfortable, if the board wishes to approve it, that what's outlined can be included as conditions of approval. If you have any specific questions about anything in my memo, feel free to ask me.
Thank you. Jim, would you like to make a motion?
Sure. I'd move that we approve this permit with the conditions as noted in the July 6th planning memo, and that our approval includes all the mandatory findings that go along with a site plan special permit.
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great, thank you all.
Okay, thank you. All right, our next piece of business is to review and approve the Select Board short and long-term goals, which we worked out back on June 30th. And the town manager did some wordsmithing on them, sent it to me. I did a couple of grammatical checks on those. The one item that I would bring to your attention, our number one short-term goal, as written, is to hire a diversity, equity, inclusion officer position utilizing the input from the Collins Center study. I note that reviewing the Collins Center report, They're suggesting that the term actually be diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism, and the position would be a director, not an officer. Obviously, we've not had a chance for all of us to review the Collins Center report. I'm not sure we need to change the goal, but I would take note that we do have some slight changes to make that compliant with what I presume will be the final report. Does anyone else have any comments after reviewing the reworked goals? Jim?
Sure. So we had a very terse definition of the second of the short-term goals. I think it was building electrification mobilization. So I totally get that a series of nouns is not really a goal. But I'd like to question the verbs we've added here. Right now we're saying investigate the feasibility of implementing a townwide building electrification program to convert existing residential buildings to all electric heating and cooking systems. So I'd suggest a few small changes, which would be to, instead of investigating the feasibility, which I think we have a proof of concept already in the town of Ithaca, but to simply plan and start implementing. And the other change I would suggest is change all electric heating and cooking systems to just all electric systems, since there are, other parts of systems other than heating and cooking.
Could you review the exact wording change that you're proposing for the beginning of that phrase?
Sure. Instead of investigate the feasibility of, change that to plan and start. Plan and start implementing. And the other change I would recommend is remove the words heating and cooking.
I think that that's a really significant change at the beginning, because I think, although you cite a study which I've not seen from the city of Ithaca, I think we still have to do a serious feasibility study as opposed to just starting to implement. And I think that changes the focus's goal considerably. So I'm much more comfortable, frankly, with the wording that we discussed earlier on. I'll open up to other comments. David.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of wording that kind of goes in between. I agree that a feasibility study it should be the first step. I also take Jim's point that it's a couple levels of indirection here. And I think that, I don't know if we agree that if there's something that we can start implementing, we would, right? Right, if we, so one of the town buildings is up for replacement of an HVAC system or something, we would replace it with an electric one. To me, depends on what plan means. Design and implement. Plan is more indirect, I think. Or we could just have plan. I mean, I think there's nothing prohibiting us from starting, right? And probably if we started anything that it would have to, if it was a grant or something, it would be a vote on the part of this board. And if it was an expenditure of town funds, it would be a vote by town meeting. So could we just say, plan the implementation of a townwide building electrification program to convert existing residential buildings to all electric systems?
Imogen.
Thank you. Yes, I do. I like the idea of saying plan on implementing a townwide building electrification, et cetera, et cetera. I do think that it is important that we do some planning, but also recognize that this is something that is part of our climate action plan on making significant strides in building electrification. And so if we do want to go per this document and see what our long-term goals are in continuing progress on our climate action plan, I think that being a little bit more direct with their language on this, which is a component of that plan, makes sense.
Mr. Manager.
Yeah, I think I did my best to interpret what I believe to be the intent of the goal-setting work that happened a few weeks ago. While there is a proof of concept in a city in New York, those are two very big differences between what we are, which is a town in Massachusetts, and we have different abilities to implement things based on what our state allows and what our governmental structure allows, just being a town and having to go to town meeting, for example, where a city could get something approved in 2 weeks. So I think that the first step in this would be investigating the feasibility, which is why I added that language. If it were a long-term goal, I think we could say something more about planning how to do it, because I think if we had a 3 or 4 year horizon, I think that would be a better way to phrase it. But if we're trying to do something in 1 year, I think investigating the feasibility is a really good way to advance that effort.
Thank you. Jim.
So I note that Andrea's been talking about starting a pilot, soon. So I wonder if there's a way of combining this language where we let's see, study the feasibility and pilot pilot the implementation of, and then the rest of the phrase like it is. The word pilot, I think, gives us some room to understand that we are, taking initial steps. Yeah.
Well, my opinion is that we should not plan on taking any initial steps until we've determined that there's a feasibility of doing this. And I see two pieces to this. One is what we propose to do with town-owned facilities, which we've kind of been on the forefront in trying to green all of our infrastructure, and that goes back 25 years. And I think it's a much larger step that was discussed about trying to roll this out for all privately owned structures in town. And I think that's the real feasibility stumbling block that I see. I think we can do pretty much whatever we need to and whatever makes sense for town buildings, but if you're talking about rolling this out to the general public, you talked in the goal-setting process about setting up an RFP, have engineers come in, take a look at this, study our housing stock, try to figure out bank loans or how you're going to fund all this. That screams to me as a feasibility study. So I think that, in the intervening 2 weeks, you've amped this thing up considerably, and not in a way that I'm comfortable with, frankly. Jim.
So I think what I hear you saying is that the RFP and the RFI and all that kind of part of the process fits into a reasonable definition of studying feasibility.
Yeah, I have no problem with doing a study.
Great. Me too.
David.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. And I'll just note that we also have our long-term goal for making continuing progress on the climate action plan. So that's separate, and nothing in this goal prevents making progress on the climate action plan.
So in that case, it seems like the only change I'd be proposing here would be to remove the phrase heating and cooking.
I have no objection to that. Anyone else?
I think that's good because there's four major uses: heating, cooking, heating domestic hot water, and a dryer. Those are the four main ones.
Okay. So we've made that change. Any other edits that people care to offer? All right, seeing none, I will entertain a motion to accept these short and long-term goals with the edit of changing it to omitting the words heating and cooking under goal 2.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Case.
I have
Mr. Manager.
Just a note that I want to make sure that the members recognize that number 8 is the combination of, I believe, 2 goals. Just so you're comfortable with that.
I believe so, and I expect there'll be a heated discussion as this proceeds. So we've got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. So accepted. Item number 5, update on the Collins, UMass, Boston Fort. Mr. Manager.
Thank you. So in the 2021 town meeting, funding was approved to study and implement a new position for this organization focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in January of this year, we started a project with the Collins Center at UMass Boston to do a comprehensive study of the issue, which included interviewing and direct communications with 30 to 40 people in the community, including staff and residents. Included 3 listening sessions. I believe they were all Zoom. Maybe one of them was in person. And they had some other smaller focus group settings. They received feedback from our DEI commission and from our select board. And with that, they developed 23 findings and recommendations and compiled a final report, which was published on June 30th. It is in the packet for this meeting for those that want to review it. The recommendations, I think, are very helpful for what I see as the next steps in this process. And included in here is a job description and an organizational structure. They have recommended that this position be a director level position, reporting directly to me and not supervising necessarily any other departments or divisions, and not being supervised by any other departments or divisions. That this position would focus on both internal and external work related to promoting and advancing efforts for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And to the note brought up earlier by the chair, the actual job description and position title that they created was Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And their primary focus will be including diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. But they feel like that's almost an industry standard term now, DEI, and that would be a helpful way to recruit for that position, understanding that the anti-racism work would be part of what they do here. So I hope you had a chance to review the report. I'm excited and looking forward to moving forward on recruiting for this position this summer, and I just wanted to make sure that the board had an opportunity to provide any other comments or suggestions before I do that.
So I guess the question I've had a chance to go through the report in some detail, and I know that the other members of the board have received it. I'm not sure that it's been widely circulated throughout the community. So I think it would be important that folks generally get a chance to read through it or the opportunity. I recognize that you'd like to get started on your hiring process, but I was questioning how quickly before you're going to go out into the marketplace to look for a candidate. And if you can hold off for 2 weeks, and if we could just maybe make some final motion on this at our next board meeting, just to see if there's any input from the community that we should incorporate.
Yeah, thank you. One of these steps that the Collins Center team took, which I think was pretty good, they were very comprehensive. They did a lot of work on this, more than I think they thought they were going to do. But one of the final things they did was they had a meeting, I think it was in early June, to offer an opportunity for the public to see their preliminary results. Kind of before they hit print on the report, they wanted to give that opportunity for those that were interested to hear about it. And I think some people did go to that. And, but yeah, I certainly would like take a couple days off in the next few weeks. So I don't mind waiting to get starting on this, but I do think the product that's presented was comprehensive, included more community engagement that I thought we were going to get from it. So I'm optimistic that this addresses everyone's concerns that we may hear in the next 2 weeks.
If we put this on the agenda for 2 weeks hence, would you like to have a formal vote from the board to accept the report? Would that put you in a stronger position, in your opinion?
Having the support of the board always helps me with what I'm doing. I do feel that my direction is clear without that to move forward on this, but I would love to have that vote of support.
I'll open up to the other members of the board. David?
Yes, I'd like to see us accept the report tonight. I don't think we're going to be taking edits from the public to a poor report. It is what it is, and there's been significant public input, and all the public input is quoted in the report. I think the suggestion moving forward for hiring in 2 weeks, that makes sense, right? So I'd like to see us accept the report tonight and see if there's any additional public input on our actions, and then and presumably ask the town manager to move ahead with hiring in 2 weeks.
Fran?
What he said. So I don't feel the need to wait for 2 weeks to take this to another meeting. I've attended some of these community outreach sessions. I think a lot of the community that wanted to be heard attended, and if we circulate this report starting now, I think that would be great. But I'm ready to vote on this now, tonight.
Imogen?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what everyone said. I had a chance to read through the report, and it was magnificently done. There was a lot of thought put into it, even down to a lot of times when we talk about DEI, we talk about it as just like one concept, whereas when we're promoting diversity, that's a separate thing than when we're promoting equity than when we're promoting inclusion. They're different concepts. They require their own type of thinking and planning and implementation. And even within the description, it was to me, very clear how those intersected, but at the same time, how they are going to be worked on individually. And so I thought that just the care that was put into this, the detail that was put into this, and also just the scope of public input that occurred throughout this entire process. So not even just like letting the public comment at the end of everything being drafted up, but truly throughout the entire process from start to finish. I think I'm ready to vote on it tonight. I think that the public comment has been really adequate and really well done by everyone. The DEIC, Collins Center, everyone did a really great job.
See if you wanted to heap on, Jim, while you've got
I just didn't have anything new to add. I'm also fine with voting on this tonight. Although I will say, There was a technical error in the community overview that I wrote to John about, so there would be a one-word change that I prefer to see in the final report, but I'm happy to approve this, pending, typos and errors of fact.
David, would you propose a motion?
Yes, I move that the board accept the Collins Center DEI report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Some comment, Mr. Cadlick.
There's nothing really surprising in this report, predicted a year ago. However, I don't think too many people are aware of the 43 pages of this particular report. I'll start by a couple of quick questions which perhaps you can answer. What's salary level 17?
So the non-union salaries are graded by numbers, and that one is a range of approximately 89 to 115.
Thank you. And if you are able to show the list of recommendations, number 13 has to do with keeping track of finances. I don't understand that at all. If you could show it, you'll see what I mean. There's nothing mentioned about this position dealing with finances in any different way from anybody else. So what is the purpose of that?
Thanks for that question. I actually was curious about that myself, and the more I thought about it, I realized it was just meant to show that anyone that's hired as a director level in this organization should be able to work with us on the budget, work with us for purchase orders and things like that. So I really think it's related to just general running an office necessities.
Everybody at that level has that responsibility, is that it? Well, you can vote to go ahead. I mean, I had trouble finding this document as long as a couple of days ago. I finally got a copy of it. There's a lot in there. Public comments. For example, there's a description of the meeting at the library on April 30th, where some of you were there, which quite a few people expressed some concerns about the need for this position at all. That's not in the report. The report is one-sided. It's all predictable. Going to hire this person for $100,000 a year, and, they'll do DEIC, whatever that means these days. I don't have any illusions that that's going to change. But I just want you to know there would be a very good idea to let more people know that this report exists. Not many people know that.
Thank you. I think Charlie raised a good point, and I think it's important that we move ahead with this vote tonight, that as the report is finalized with any final edits or typos, that it get posted on the website in some prominent position as soon as possible. We could make that happen, Mr. Manager. That would be great. So unless there's further discussion, we have a motion and a second.
There's one hand up.
Oh, okay. Matt, if you could let the individual speak.
We have Nijan Datar. I've unmuted him.
So I'm just going to elaborate on 2 points that Charlie made. One is the grade 17, and you mentioned 89,000 to 115,000. As I recall, the town meeting voted for a salary of 35,000 for the Collins Center itself, and then 50,000 as a 6-month salary for the position. So I'm guessing that the town didn't authorize any salary more than 100,000, and I don't know if the 100,000 includes benefits. And I mean, what was the 50,000 we voted on as part of the 85,000 when it was 6 months? So I don't know that you have town authorization to spend more than 100,000 yearly salary, at least I'd like a clarification of what we voted on at town meeting and how meaningful that is if the numbers don't add up, because we did vote on a specific number called 85,000. That's one thing. Secondly, I just happened to glance, I haven't read the whole report, but I did read the important sections on community input that Charlie mentioned. And, and I hear voices of how beautiful the report was. As Charlie said, I was at one of the meetings at the library, and I know that two of the select members were there, Fran Arsenault and David Martin. And if you have to be totally honest, do you really think that the summary that was at the end of the report characterized the meeting there? I mean, it absolutely did not. I mean, this is like a conclusion. It's not even truthful what happened. So you're sort of just ramming it down our throats. And I'd like to know what was the vote taken at the town meeting and how it pertains to the actual numbers of salaries that are going to happen. Because we voted for 50,000 half yearly, and if it's going to be up to 115,000, that's not what we voted. And what say do we have as a public on this? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manager.
Thank you for the question about the budget. That's very helpful. The FY23 budget that just became effective earlier this week does include funding for a full year's salary for this position. So the funding remaining from the capital article from 2021 will be used to supplement that to make sure that there's enough to cover the full salary. So in other words, the position is funded.
Thank you. David.
Yeah, can I just ask, for the upper amount on that range, did you say 115 or 150?
115.
That's what I thought, and I just wanted to make sure that everybody heard that correctly. Thank you. Oh, may I say one more thing? Yeah. So at the meeting that Mr. Datar refers to, every detail is not in this report, but this report, the task for this report was different than that. I mean, there were a number of people at that meeting who objected that the position was approved by town meeting at all. But this report was to figure out how to integrate this position into town government. And that's what this report reports on, right? Not the fact that some people in towns, even though it was passed by town meeting, still would prefer that we not hire someone.
Thank you. All right, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, Mr. Manager, you have an approved plan? I think you're good to go on. Don't take those days off. You got to write that job ad.
Okay, I'll start working on it. Thank you very much.
All right, on another matter, item 6, an update on the dog park and the Acton Housing Authority McManus Manor project. So I just want to take the opportunity to bring the board and the public up to speed on what's been going on down there. If you drive by on Main Street, about the only thing you've noticed is that part of the area eventually to become a dog park was recently mowed. So I figure I'll let everybody else know what's going on. One of the short-term goals that we voted on last year was to develop a comprehensive plan for the entire site, which is the dog park area, which is the area on Main Street closest to Route 2. Then there's kind of a mound which has some ledge in it, which we're going to be making into a senior park, sort of a passive recreation area. And then, of course, where the Kennedy landscape is presently operating out of, that will be a housing authority project. So as far as progress towards those goals, the dog park committee put together some preliminary plans, made an application to the Stanton Foundation, got a $25,000 design grant. The town has hired Dennis Dale Associates, landscape architects, to work on the plan for the dog park. Those plans have advanced considerably. I walked the site with the dog park folks and the designer last week. So we've got a better understanding of what's going to happen down there, and that we've made really good progress there. One of the other moving parts of the entire project is the decision needs to be made by this board sometime in the future as to whether the Housing Authority project will be hooked up to town sewer or septic, because obviously either the septic infrastructure or the sewer infrastructure would have quite an impact on what's going to happen on the dog park site. I think everyone understands that the first and most important part of this entire project is to get the Housing Authority project started. Really, we can't work too much on the dog park until we know what's going to happen. And obviously, if we go with septic in the dog park, that's got to be built before you can even think about building a dog park down there. So all of this is going to take some time to tease out. The central location, the mound, which has been referred to as a senior park, and sort of an operating term, we've been calling this the Main Street campus. That we're looking at expanding the design for the dog park to include that site, and looking at some pretty exciting ideas with some walkways, some landscaping, connecting everything with some nice sidewalks, and make this an amenity not only for the folks using the dog park and for seniors who might wish to come by, but obviously the tenants of the eventual Housing Authority project. So that piece still has to be worked on. We've still got to come up with some design and some design funding for that. That will be sort of the last follow-on piece. And then obviously the Housing Authority project, as anybody who drives by there can see, Kennedy Landscape is still operating on part of that site. That agreement under which they're occupying the site expired some time ago. They will be moving off the site. There will be some movement on that in the not too distant future. I will say that throughout the entire process, there's been extraordinarily good cooperation between the Dog Park Committee, the Recreation Commission, the Acton Housing Authority, the Council on Aging, GPI, the engineering firm that's working on the sewers, Hancock Engineering, who've been working with the Housing Authority for their site, and certainly our town engineer has been doing a great job kind of putting all of the little pieces together. So it might seem like nothing's happening, and certainly physically on the ground, not a lot has happened, but there is quite a bit of work that's going on behind the scenes. It's still going to be a couple of years before anybody gets to walk their dog on that site. But it is coming along, and I think we're going to have a really nice combined site that's going to benefit the Housing Authority folks, the general senior population, and certainly many of our dog owners in town and dog owners from other towns that come by. So that's, just wanted to give you an update that this hasn't been forgotten, and we're moving ahead on achieving that goal. If any member of the board has any questions, I'd be happy to address them. David.
So I don't have a question. I just want to say I'm very excited about all three aspects of this site: the dog park, the senior park in the center, and the Housing Authority project. I completely agree that this is I'm hopeful that we can make progress sooner rather than later, but in a few years' time, it's going to be a very nice area.
Thank you. All right then, moving along to a update regarding the West Acton Citizens Library. Mr. Manager.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk to you about some of what I've been learning about the history of the West Acton Citizens Library, and also talk to you about some exciting things we have planned for the future. So let me just get this on presentation mode. So here we are. As I mentioned, this building in this little library has a very unique history and I believe a very exciting future. The historic building is one of the oldest buildings on in Windsor Ave, and it's one of the oldest libraries in the state, was what people say. It's actually been a town department since 1962, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. And as such, funding is appropriated every year to run the library, which includes the personnel and the operational expenses. In 1962, there was a Citizens Library Trustees formed, a 3-member board that advocates and supports the library and oversees the gift funds that it controls. And in the future that we'll be talking about in a few moments, the trustees will remain in this role. So interestingly, it's been referred to, the Citizens Library has actually been referred to as a branch of the Memorial Library since at least 1938. Some recent concerns that we've been hearing, I think may relate to a history of how services at that library were lost. Twice, in 1951 and 1961, the library was closed, and the community was upset and went to town meeting and brought it back. So it's a really cool story of how this library has survived 2 attempts to be closed, and I believe it's done its work. That was 60 to 80 years ago, and this library is here to stay. So, I think the future here is we're going to increase services. We've already seen a tremendous amount of access being added to people that use that library by being connected to the Minuteman network. Instead of the 10,000 or so books that the library has in its collection, it now has access to millions of books through the Minuteman Library Network. We're going to be hiring a full-time librarian to replace the part-time director, who Jennifer Freeman was an excellent director, even though she was only working part-time. She did amazing things there for 10 or so years, but we're going to bring in someone full-time. And we're going to improve continuity of services by utilizing staff over here at Memorial Library. As a one-person operation, if Jennifer was on vacation or was out sick, the library would normally just be closed, or we'd scramble to find someone to cover it. What we want to do in the future is have a more consistent way of staffing the library so that it doesn't close for periods of time. So I really think it's some exciting things ahead of us. But before I get into them, I want to talk a little bit more about the history, because I spent a lot of time figuring this out, so I wanted to share it with you all. So in 1938 is the first record that I identified that referred to it as a branch. And at the time, we actually had 2 branch libraries, one in South Acton and one at this location in West Acton. And at that time, the town appropriated funding to help transport books to and from Memorial Library to those 2 branch locations. But then in 1951, and I don't know exactly what was going on at the time, but I understand funding was an issue, and the library trustees decided to close the 2 branches. And so this is just some news coverage from back then, as well as a letter to the editor saying it was a bad idea. And then later that year, in March, the voters at town meeting appropriated $175 to reopen the West Acton branch. People came out and wanted to see that library operating, and they showed up at town meeting to make it happen. But then in 1961, at the end of the year, it was announced that the library would again be closing on January 1st, and the Citizens Library Association was concerned and worked with the volunteers and the many members of the community that truly love this library, and proposed to the town that it gift the building and the library to the town to actually be part of the town government. They agreed to clean it up and make some repairs before doing so. That went to town meeting in March, And Article 54 was passed, which was to accept the gift of that building to make it part of the town's facility inventory. And it also created the trustees, 3-member trustees elected in a fashion described here, and that the Acton continues to operate this property for the purposes of a library under the name of Citizens Library of West Acton. And that established a budget at that time, $300 a year to operate the library. And it really was the first year that it was a part of the town government. And then later that summer, after town meeting, the Citizens Library transferred the land and the deed was recorded, and we officially owned, the organization officially added it to its building inventory in 1962. A year later, they issued the first town report as being a town department. It looks like they collected $109 in fines, which is interesting. We're now proudly fare-free here in Acton at our libraries. And here we are. So 60 years later is where we are now, right? This is the budget that was approved. This is the description of the library as it was approved in the FY23 budget document. It's a beautiful library. We provide very nice services. There's 1,200 households within a 1-mile radius. There's a great sidewalk network where people can access this. It's really a village. It really feels like a village library. But now, with the access to the Minuteman network, we have really enhanced the services available to that. The budget approved this year was $55,000 for personnel, $11,000 for expenses. The org chart was, we had a part-time director and some funding for substitute librarians. Then some transitions happened. West Acton, the library, Jennifer retired last week, and that's her picture here on the left. She's next to Jennifer Harris, who served for 3 or 4 months as our interim director at the Memorial Library. And then last month, Maria Palacio started as our new Memorial Library director. And so we have some new staffing and some real excitement to get this Citizens Library really continuing to be a vibrant part of the community. So we had initially approved the summer staffing plan working with the trustees. We're going to have staffing increased, use some AML staff to help fill shifts, use a senior worker. There's a woman who worked there for many years, who's a school teacher, was able to increase her hours this summer as we were able to stabilize the staffing situation there heading into the fall. And we've actually increased the hours at the library due to the measures that we're taking right now. We hope that we can maintain that going forward, but for right now, we're keeping hours, and we're excited to provide these services. In-person services remain, programming remains. One thing that we're doing differently is instead of having Jennifer upstairs doing the cataloging and binding of books and all the things you do behind the scenes at a library, some of that work will be done over here next door. And if there's any gift funds used from the Citizens Library, those would of course require any approval from the Citizens Library trustees before they're used. The future, as I mentioned, we're looking to hire a full-time librarian to coordinate services and program at this facility, 40 hours instead of 28. This new position will provide staff support as needed to the Citizens Library trustees. This new position, we would have report to the Memorial Library director instead of reporting directly to me, which I think would give that person a much better support network. I try to be a good supervisor to as many people as I can, but sometimes having someone else intermediate would really provide a better level of support to people that on a day-to-day basis. And we'd also utilize AML staff as needed to offer programs and services. I know that our children's librarian was over there last week for an outdoor reading program, which I think went pretty well. The trustees, what about the trustees? So the trustees serve as the guardian of the gift fund. That would remain. Someone asked how much is in there. Just over $24,000 is in there currently. We would love to have a trustee sit in on the recruitment process for this new librarian position that we'll be hopefully hiring later this summer. The trustees would continue to be involved in discussions regarding services and programs at the library. They continue to focus on making the library a unique part of West Acton Village. And, you know, one thing that we need to discuss tonight is that there's actually a vacant seat of that elected Board of Trustees that needs to be filled. So how to fill a vacant seat of an elected office? It's outlined in Chapter 41. Basically, once the board receives notice that there's a vacancy, we should solicit for interest. And then once candidates are identified, the board should meet jointly with the trustees with a week's notice instead of 48 hours notice. And then you take a joint vote to select who that trustee would be, and they would serve in that position until the next election cycle where the person would be elected as they normally are. So that's sort of the update. And so the main asks here of the board are to engage in that process of filling the vacant trustee position, and just to provide any feedback that you have for us on moving forward with the plan that we've outlined, which I think will really continue to make West Acton Citizens Library a very special place for the community.
Thank you. Well, I'll start off in part because I actually served for a couple of years as a trustee of the West Acton Citizens Library. You know, I think the first question I've got is, have we received a request from the remaining trustees yet notifying us that there is a vacancy that they would like to see filled?
I believe that I haven't received an email, but I believe there's a desire to fill that seat. So yes, I think we could probably get that right now.
Okay, that's the first item. You know, I think in addition to what you noted happening in 51 and 62, and then more recently there was another attempt to cut the funding for the library, and that frankly did not go very well for anybody. And I'm personally really invested in the idea of keeping that library operational, keeping it viable. I think one of the things that I witnessed was a level of frustration amongst members of the public because it was not open enough hours, or the posted hours, we didn't always have somebody there because of, you know, vacations, holidays, sick time, or if Jennifer was involved with matters up here at Town Hall. So I think people got really frustrated with not having staffing there. And I think that really worked very badly as far as cutting down on the amount of circulation and usage of the library. So I think it's really important that we get a full-time 40-hour-a-week person that isn't going to get dragged out of there to do other things. And I think that's a very positive move. I think everyone wants to keep that library going, and it's just a question of what is the most efficient way of doing it. The other issue that I have is to make sure that, you know, we all understand that we're not going to cannibalize the budget of the Memorial Library to provide these services. At some point, we're going to need to look at the town's overall budget and foreseeably increase the budget for library services generally. So I think, you know, whatever we can do to bridge the gap between now and next year is important to do, but I think we all have to be very clear-eyed about this, that you don't go from a 28-hour-a-week person to a 40-hour-a-week person. And even with different pay scales, you're probably going to end up having to come up with some more money to finance this, and I think that is a really, really good investment that I think we should all be prepared to make. So those are just, you know, my brief observations. The building is a gem, and I think there's a lot of very exciting things that can be done, not only with the existing building, but we've got the Windsor building across the street, which I think provides some really good opportunities for meeting space or certainly some other library programs. So I think we should look bigger rather than smaller We should look forward rather than back on this. So with that, I'll open it up to other members of the board for their comments. Imogen.
Thank you. So thank you for the presentation. It's been a topic of discussion for several weeks. WACL was able to discuss this a little bit, although it hasn't been discussed much. AML had the presentation given to them as well, so there was discussion there. Overall, I think that the presentation and what the view is for WACL trustees is reflective of what a lot of people want to see in terms of making a more strong partnership, for example, between AML and WACL, especially given the fact that we've had Jennifer retire, and without AML's staffing support, those doors would not open. And so it's been really critical having their support. I think that for me, the important thing is we talk about establishing a timeline of what we want to happen when. I do think that having WACL's voice in this is important. The way that I propose it is we go forth with, as a first step, filling the vacant seat. So that means, to what the town manager said, have it so that WACL, the 2 members of WACL can be here, 5 select board members. We put out a call that's public for anyone who wants to serve as a WACL Board of Trustee member. We have an open nomination, and then from there kind of decide on who we think would best serve in that 3rd seat until we do have a town meeting next year. And then in terms of the next steps, I think that this board could very much help shape that direction. So for example, if, we want the trustees to potentially have a role, and to what degree they would have that role in the recruitment process, I think that having their input in that would be helpful. In terms of how they plan to be continued in the discussions moving forward, having the Board of Trustees at least give some guidance to that, I think would be important. And so for me, I see the first steps as, let's fill the vacancy, and then kind of based on that, let's inform the details on how this Board of Trustees will be structured. So that way, if we do hire a director, there will be a clear understanding of to what degree the trustees would be working with the director. And so branch manager, so that there wouldn't be ambiguity. And then the third thing I'll mention, and then I'll be quiet, is so one thing that Miriam actually mentioned during our call that I found really helpful was just understanding the structure of what this new management would look like. So essentially, Maria would be the person that this new branch manager would directly report to. And similar to how we have like a department head for the library, so we have a head of children's section and things like that, it would be an equivalent position in that hierarchy, which means that that person would report to Maria. And I think that that type of organization makes sense to me. But again, having WACL trustees, but in terms of what that looks like, I think that those details do need to be hashed out. And the first step is we need to fill this vacant position.
Thank you. David.
Thank you. I like Dean, I know people who wanted to walk or started to walk to WACL to pick up their Minuteman books, and then they got a little frustrated by it because the hours were limited and unpredictable. So now instead of walking to WACL, they drive to the Memorial Library to pick up their Minuteman books. I'm completely in favor of this plan. I like the fact that we're having a full-time branch manager instead of a part-time director. I like the fact that that it's that person reports to the library director, and the library director is responsible for keeping keeping WACL open for its hours. So if the the branch librarian is out sick or on vacation or something, the library can remain open. And I think that's what people want. I'm also, I think the existing WACL trustees have to take the first step, but I'm, like Imogen, I'm very open to filling the trustee's seat following the outlined process. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim?
I got to be a little bit involved in this question as the liaison to the VCC. So I got a chance to the Volunteer Coordinating Committee. So I got a chance to talk to people, to look at some of the old records. And somewhere along the way, it seemed like the agenda item or the rumor mill or something had turned this conversation into, oh, they want to shut down the library, which is maybe a sort of traumatic reaction based on all the other times that the library has been attempted to be closed. But I think the manager has correctly reflected the will of the residents, which is no, we love this library. It's going to keep going. I think it's a good plan for expanding what the West Acton Citizens Library can do. I think the only special comment or extra comment I'd make is about the role of the West Acton Library trustees. I couldn't find, and I don't know if you did, but I looked for a formal charge or charter for the West Acton Citizens Library trustees. After '62, after the library became part of the town, and I couldn't find one. So, looking at old minutes, it seems like there's this ebb and flow about the role of the trustees. Sometimes the trustees are relatively passive. The librarian makes a lot of the decisions. Sometimes the trustees are very active. And I think that we want to find a way to have the trustees be as active as possible for a couple of reasons. One is they represent they have a lot of deep knowledge and history with the place, and in that sense, they are representing the West Acton community. They have a special feel for the kind of connections that have been made there. So you've outlined, I think, some good points about what the Citizens Library trustees should be doing. I think it might be time to turn that into an actual charge from this board so that they know, oh gosh, yes, we will be consulted on, thinking of a recent example, suddenly one of the rooms was emptied of all books. That was sort of a shock. That to me sort of a major rearrangement of the library, I think should be the trustees should be consulted. So I think there's probably a list of things that the trustees should be consulted about. Their involvement in the hiring seems like a good thing to write down there. I don't know if that needs to happen before we get a new trustee. Hopefully not, because I don't want to slow down the process. But it might be good for future trustees to have that. Citizens Library trustees, they have terms, they turn over. At some point, someone might not want to run for re-election, and it'd be good to have a clear sort of job description for what this group of citizens does. Thanks.
I'm trying to figure out a negative in this because I think it all sounds positive. I just wanted to be clear that the West Acton Citizens Library will still maintain their trustees and work with the main branch, their trustees, and sort of have it a joint effort.
Yeah, so the way that I'm proposing it is that the trustees would be solely responsible for what they are now, which is advocating for the Citizens Library for, if they want to create a new program about gardening, that they would bring that forward and say, here's funding and here's what we want to do. Mm-hmm. I think if there's questions about the building, it is a building that is historic and it is very charming, but it's also a building that's not ADA compliant. And so at some point, we're going to have to address that And I think that would be a group that we'd work very closely with to address that and say, you know, what do you think about this and how do you want to address that? And so I think, yes, they're going to have a key role in the stewardship of that building, which is very special, and I think is an important role. And I think having people that are in the village is a great way to maintain that continuity of I think what's been special about it going back a long time.
Thanks.
So, what I'd like to do, unless there's any other comments from the board, I'd like to open up to the public. Please come forward. If you folks want to line up so that we can process through your comments and hear what you have to say.
Hi, I'm Annette Lockery. I live at 57 Windsor Avenue. I've lived in Acton for 31 years, up the street from the library. I've been very actively involved in the library. For 22 years, I ran the Tot Time program, which I designed, and I ran there every Monday for 22 years until it ended because of COVID. When I heard some news about the possible change in the status of Citizens Library, the town manager was generous enough to spend some time with me. And one of the words he used that made me feel quite at ease was that there would be a partnership between Citizens Library and Memorial Library. My concern was particularly about the role of the trustees. I was assured there would be a partnership. But what I'm hearing now isn't quite the kind of partnership that I'm familiar with legally. In a partnership, people have equal authority as each other. In the way this is being portrayed, the citizens, trustees would have recommending powers or have a role. What my interest would be, that I would advocate for, is that they would have a partnership. I think there's no doubt at all that Memorial Library and Citizens Library working together would be fantastic. Memorial Library has incredible people, incredible resources, great innovative ideas, and I think they would really, really benefit the Citizens Library. My only reluctance is the term partnership isn't part of that presentation. I'm not suggesting that the citizens trustees should decline anything. Citizens could use the help, but to cut the trustees at Citizens Library off. Citizens Library's trustees have hired people, they've interviewed people, they've hired the librarians, they've done a great job of it. For many years, until the last 10 years or so, the librarians weren't educated as librarians, and I think they did a pretty okay job. Citizens Library isn't just a small version of a big library. I think anybody who walks into that building knows it's like coming home. I felt that way the first time I walked in, and I still feel that way. Anybody who comes in feels that way. The Tot Time program brought a lot of kids and parents in, many of whom continued coming to Citizens Library just because they love it. The role of the trustees is to keep that charm, to be responsible for it, to be the caretakers. It would take nothing away from what the input can be from Memorial. But having the trustees continue their caretaker, technical oversight of what happens in the library is not in a partnership if they don't have that authority. I think they should not be advisors, excuse me, or have a little input on things. I think they have an equal partnership role in decisions that happen. I don't think the citizens trustees want to make decisions about what happens at Memorial, but I think they care about what's going to happen at Citizens Library. Again, if a real partnership doesn't work, given a few years, then there may be no choice but to have Acton Memorial run everything, pretty much like what's in that proposal. but I'm urging everybody's consideration of allowing the current functioning of the Citizens Libraries trustees to be maintained the way they are. They're doing more than just overseeing the trust fund. They could hire a banker to do that. The trustees keep the character and the personality and the consistency for the community. It's a very special place. I urge consideration to be given to letting it be a true partnership. And I'm happy to answer any questions and help in any way. But I would just remind people that both libraries have good things about them. They're very different. So Citizens Library isn't just a small version of a big library. It's its own identity, and it should stay that way. And I think that means being run by its Board of Trustees. Again, Citizens Library needs all the help it can get for resources, help, programs, personnel, ideas, anything. Absolutely. But not at the expense of the integrity of the trustees.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Dot Curtis. I am one of the trustees, proudly and happily. And actually, my perception of what the town manager presented sounded like we as trustees would be doing more than we are doing now. We have not been making decisions and hiring decisions and et cetera. And also Jennifer, as a part-time, that is almost a joke, because she worked more than a 40-hour person could even try to do. And she'll be sorely missed. But I myself am excited about this collaboration, and I've been assured also by members of selectmen that we will be a partnership, that there'll be added benefits for the town. And initially loaning a book from AML and being able to pick it up at Citizens, the system had a glitch or two. So like all systems, it takes a little time. And now it's going along beautifully. And I think that's very good for people. And also the increased hours are critical. I agree with that. And so I did not know that I needed to send an email that we have a vacant seat, but I will proceed to do that if that's what I need to do, and then go forward with finding the next trustee. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lauren Rosenzweig Morton, 26 Marshall Path. I used to live on Kinsley Road behind Gardner Field. And so I was one of the people with Annette that brought the library back in, I guess, kept it going in 1990 something. Anyway, so I think you're on the right track. It sounds like you're wanting to honor the West Acton character and all of that as well. So I do urge you to listen to the input of West Acton residents and, try and create a trustee structure that is more of a partnership and that will be reflective of the nearby community and which of course is open to everyone in Acton. So thank you.
Thank you.
Miriam Lezak. I am a member of the Acton Memorial Library Board of Trustees. However, I am not speaking for the board. And I just want to say there's been a lot of discussion actually, I'm going to backtrack completely. With the structure that I think John has put forward of having the much closer cooperation between Acton Memorial Library and West Acton staffing, it opens up so many more doors for West Acton. We can, besides making sure that we can have more hours at that West Acton can have more hours, that there could be programs, that they can have one librarian there and another librarian who comes in and does programming. There's just, it opens up all kinds of possibilities for West Acton and for their trustees. I think it really is a partnership, and having having a branch manager as part of the Acton libraries creates a synergy that really helps West Acton. And I think it creates something for West Acton, so it will grow, it's already vibrant, but it will keep that vibrancy. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone online?
Yes, we have one call-in user.
Yes, if you'd
Go
let
ahead.
them speak, please. Thank you.
Hi, it's Tara. I'm from WhatsApp. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello? Yes. Oh, I have a question and then a comment. So I have spoken to select board members, and the term branch manager is brand new to me. And I feel as though, did that come up? I mean, when did that get invented? And I feel like, is that different than library director? I think words matter, and I feel like that should have been, people that have been concerned should have been notified if people plan to start calling somebody branch manager. That's the first thing. I'd like the answer to that before I make my comments. Thank you.
Mr. Manager?
So in my presentation tonight, I propose that we hire a full-time librarian. The exact title that we're going to use, I don't know that we've decided that yet, but I think they would be the person that is in charge of coordinating the programming, circulation, and other activities at that library. And we can come up with a title that makes the most sense when we're ready to post the job.
Thank you. So it's my understanding that the AML is currently a department of the town. And so I have no problem with the Citizens Library director reporting to anybody, reporting to the AML library director in an administrative fashion. But just like the library director answers to the AML library director, answers to the AML trustees, I would think that for policy matters, that the library director in West Acton would also report to the Citizens Library trustees for policy matters. And I hope that in terms of partnership, as Annette so eloquently spoke of, that the folks proposing the partnership would be in favor of creating bylaws for the, and maybe that's the charge that we're talking about, but I think bylaws is more equal if we talk in terms of partnership, just like the AML trustees have bylaws. And there's really only one paragraph that describes how the trustees interact with the town, and I think that paragraph seems perfectly reasonable. And then I want to correct something, because there was a statement made that suggested that the Citizens Library is a branch, and that there was historic information. At the 1962 vote, it recognized that part of the building was used as a branch, as a West branch. But if in fact, at that time, people felt that it was a branch, the whole thing was a branch, it would have said so, and they did not. And so I feel like it's important to recognize that history as well. And furthermore, the Minuteman Network contract was a three-party contract where the Citizens Library Association was, in fact, an entity. The town recognized that it was a separate entity. So to now be talking like it's suddenly a branch, I feel like is may perhaps even be a violation of the law. Relative to the 4/5 vote, the 2/3 vote to transfer the property to the town, it required the town to continue operating with the original mission of the Citizens Library Association and under the same name. So to start changing names and calling things different, I think it's really disrespectful and perhaps even illegal. And I hope that we can find a way to actually have a partnership, because I love the idea of a partnership. I love the idea of the AML, staff, helping staff and lending support temporarily to the Citizens Library Association trustees in support of their work. So I love the idea of a partnership, and I think that words matter, and that I like the idea of getting trustees on board, a new trustee. Also, I love that Dot came and spoke, but Tara was the one who was in the meetings having the most concern about the plan as presented. So Dot is supportive, but I would like very much to hear from Tara. She seemed to want to have this stuff in writing. So the idea of a partnership, what does that mean? And I feel like a first good step is not to act like it's a charge of a committee, but to respect them in the same way we respect the AML library trustees and have bylaws. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Point of clarification, Tara mentioned about a portion of the building being used for library. For many years, the half of the building, which was the section closest to Pearl Street, actually was used for senior housing for a low-income individual. And that went on for quite a few years, I believe, until that person passed on. So it was actually, and Carol Lake was our COA director at the time, and she was kind of facilitating and acting as a go-between on that. So whatever funding was generated from rent, I believe, went into the town's coffers, but it was very limited. It was a very low income situation. And it really sort of ended when the Windsor Green senior housing was developed further down Windsor Avenue. So there was never any intent that the building be used for anything other. This was a temporary, kind-hearted measure that was put in place. Mr. Manager.
Just to further clarify, there's nothing in this proposal that changes the name of the building or the mission of the building. Our intent is to continue to operate it as the Citizens Library and to provide library services there.
Mr. Clara.
Thank you. As a member of a three-person board in this town, I find that I believe that the town has expanded to the point where we should have a minimum of 5 people on any given board, just for the simple reason, due to the open meeting law, we can't even call one another. So just a heads up. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, one quick follow-up, Dot.
I really had to speak to what Tara said about how Tara felt. That was a meeting that Tara was at a long time ago. And sadly, Tara has had a death in her family, so she hasn't been present. So that's basically, if I was a lawyer, I'd say that was hearsay. And I don't think, I think it's offensive to quote somebody else's opinion and they're not here. So I really had to speak to that. Thanks.
Thank you. So I think what I would propose, I mean, it's a great-looking presentation, but I think the first step is to look at getting one more trustee, getting that vacancy filled. Thinking ahead, I think it's a little short notice to try to have a joint meeting at our next meeting in July. I'd like to make sure that this be widely advertised, that we're looking for folks. So I would propose that we look at having our joint meeting between the Select Board and the Citizen Library Trustees in August. I believe we've set that meeting towards the end of August. It looks like Mr. Hall is going to be the one in charge. How does everyone else feel about that? David?
Yeah, yes, that sounds very good, but, excuse me, there's no reason to not move ahead. You're not saying that there's a reason to not move ahead with the rest of the plan, right? You know, to set the broader library hours for the summer and have it be operated out of the Memorial Library, et cetera.
Absolutely. I think we move ahead with the really nice changes that the town manager and the AML director have put together. And we look at that as an interim plan from now until Labor Day. And in the meantime, we can advertise that we're looking for to fill that position and plan on having that joint meeting at our meeting in the end of August. Yes, David.
Sorry, one other point. I think also, you know, to the point that Jim made earlier, it probably is worthwhile to write something down for what the WACL trustees are responsible for.
I agree with you, and I'm looking at our erstwhile clerk, who also is the liaison to both.
Thank you. Actually, a point of clarification on that, because if we were to draft up some type of charter or something, would that be something that we would need to present to a town meeting and get an entire town vote on? Because in that case, I don't know if it would be feasible.
Mr. Manager.
Yeah, it's a good question because an elected body, I'm not sure that an unelected body can set its charge, which is what I think is what we're discussing. So that's something we can look into further. But yeah, that's a good point.
David.
But some of these things may not be a legal agreement, but rather a mode by which we operate, right? You know, the fact that the trustees get consulted on the hiring of the branch manager and things like that, you know, a set of conventions or whatever. So it depends on what we consider those policies to be.
Okay. Alyssa, we can't ignore you.
Thank you. I guess this is a point of order. It's my understanding that the roles and responsibilities of library trustees are established by state law, and they're overseen by the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners. So I just check with town council, but I'm pretty sure that this is covered in state law and we shouldn't be authoring a new charter. And it includes a lot more than overseeing gift funds. It's planning and policy and hiring and budget.
Thank you. Annette.
Actually, she took the words right out of my mouth. I didn't know the citation, but I totally agree. And that was my interest, again, in having John, the partnership you and I talked about. It could be a great partnership. It really, really can. The town has so much to offer, Memorial does, to Citizens Library, but to not strip the trustees of their ongoing day-to-day responsibility to maintain the library. There's room enough for everybody to have a say, but to maintain the integrity of the citizens trustees is making it a true partnership. So please consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Fran.
One more quick comment. I think it makes sense for a church to be thought about when there are three trustees, when the third one is appointed.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's important. Let's get a full board put together. There's obviously a lot of work that's got to be done, a lot of things teased out. I think the interim plan that the manager has right now looks really great, and probably a lot of it will continue, but let's move ahead and get that vacancy filled. So, Mr. Manager, can you make sure that we get that on our agenda for our August meeting? Thank you. Oh, yes, Imogen.
I just want to thank the current trustee members. It has been a difficult year for a lot of people, and especially for our two trustee members. Dot, thank you so much for being here, and Tara as well, for continuing to do all they can to support WACL. It's been a difficult year for everyone, and I think having a third member can help. And so just really want to give thanks to them. They truly have done an incredible job, and I'm excited for WACL. This is a good direction.
Thank you. Mr. Manager? Okay. So we've already started to fill up our agenda for August. Next, we have a presentation from the Housing and Climate Justice for Acton. They've done a great deal of work, some outreach to tenants, and they're going to present some of their findings. And then we'll have a little time for question and answer. The floor is yours.
Thank you. First, we're just going to introduce ourselves. My name is Jennifer Morazes. I live on Central Street.
Madeline Cruz, Townhouse Lane.
So I wanted first to really thank the Select Board for recognizing the importance of renters' concerns as reflected in the short and long-term goals. We really appreciate that recognition. And I wanted to start off by saying, so this is work of a volunteer committee, members of Housing and Climate Justice for Acton. What we are presenting, and we're fine with the slides and the report to be posted for people to read, but we want to emphasize this is not a scientific study. This isn't the Collins study that the DEI did. These are volunteer canvassers that did this, and what we hope is that the town will commission a study like that Collins study that would more rigorously be able to look at what renters' concerns are in Acton. To this point, the emphasis has been on renters to solve their problems and to seek out assistance, and we really want to move that emphasis onto outreach from the town and services and bylaws that can help support renters and their concerns. And so with that, there are 2,321 rental units in Acton. Renters represent almost a third of the population of Acton. Our volunteers knocked on 1,041 doors and had 250 conversations with residents of more than 15 buildings. So although volunteers, a mighty contingent. Issues were raised by 73 Acton renters, and that represented 29% of those who had conversations with the canvassers. These individuals identified a total of 141 concerns that had to do with living environment, including costs and fees beyond the rate of inflation, threats to health and safety, unresolved maintenance problems, and poor building services. Some renters reported waiting months or even years for issues to be addressed. So there's more detail in the report, but in the slides, we've summarized the themes that people brought up. Services were number one, such as trash removal or plowing. 53 concerns were brought up around services. And remember that a resident can bring up more than one concern. Health and safety concerns were 38, including mold, rats, lack of windows, operating windows, things of that nature that would pose a health and safety risk. General maintenance concerns and responsiveness, 25 concerns were brought up and 14 concerns about costs and fees. Within those themes, there were particular issues raised. And so rent and fees, again, those were 14 because that would be that entire category. But pests were number one with 9 for things other than rents and fees. Serious floodings, we've heard about people having seasonal flooding in their units as well as one-time flooding, and flooding meaning like up to your knees in flooding and having things damaged or destroyed as a result of this flooding. Trash piling up has been identified next, and unfortunately was located in certain buildings in particular as issues. The next issues were all tied for their level. Accessibility, which is a big issue with units having no elevators and multiple floors and very limited parking for people who need accessible parking, et cetera. Serious communication issues with management, lack of washing machine access. Those were all on the same level. And then sewage buildup, we know of cases within the people's apartments being an issue. So those are the things that we have found. Madeline's going to present some case studies of how this looks like when you're living in an actual building, which all of the buildings are anonymous in the report in terms of the issues raised. We also have identified some barriers, and we are keeping the people that identified those barriers anonymous for important reasons. And we also have some, suggestions for ways forward with some of these issues.
I just want to echo what Jennifer said in the beginning, that I'm a renter that everybody knows in Acton who has been through hell and back. That I'm very appreciative that you guys took into consideration everything that I've been through and a lot of other renters have been through, and you put us into the short-term goal and long-term goal. I think that means a lot. Building profiles, 2 case studies. Residents in building A reported common issues, including lack of recycling or trash pickup, serious pest issues like rats, or like we have an issue in Yankee Village right now with wasp, and it's unfortunate that a pest control company comes and an owner is telling them, hey, wasp is going into the building, and because the pest owner doesn't see the wasp at the time that he's there, he doesn't want to spray, and that to me is mind-boggling. So you're going to wait till somebody like I, who's highly allergic to wasp, to get stung and die. God forbid I didn't have my EpiPen, or someone didn't know that my EpiPen was around. That could potentially kill me. And it's things like that that I just, you get lost in translation. You just can't understand how you could surpass something like that, how you ignore something like that. A lot of people spoke about broken outside lights. You know, we live in New England. It gets pretty freaking dark. A light not having adequate light in a parking lot or in a stairwell is dangerous. If somebody falls, or you're gonna wait till that person breaks a legs or loses their life to fix the issue. You know, I know that on October 18th, I mentioned about the emergency lights not going on at Yankee Village. Until this day, it's still an issue. We've had 2 outages at Yankee Village, probably even more. And the times that I've noticed, those lights still don't go on. That shouldn't be happening. Someone needs to do something. I shouldn't have to call the chief of the fire department as a renter. That should be the obligation of, you know, the condo association or the management company who keeps ignoring these issues. Somebody needs to do something. Another issue, which, as you all know, I'm huge on this, is mold. Mold makes people in general sick, but some of us are highly allergic to it. And landlords, management companies, condo associations need to take accountability. Again, why are we waiting till people get sick, severely sick, and ending up in hospital to resolve this issue? General lack of responsiveness to residents' concern, that's huge. I understand that there is this, you know, general population that's like, well, if it doesn't involve us, why should we care? Well, you should care because if that resident didn't live and pay their rent in your unit or in your house or in one of your developments, you wouldn't be where you are today. Therefore, you should care. And every word that comes out of a resident's mouth should be something that you should be addressing and not ignoring. And I think that it's huge that we come together as a community, as a town, and say, enough is enough, making bylaws or helping to accommodate people that are suffering from this. Many cited how expensive the units were in addition to other bills related to their housing. Residents in Building N had concerns that included trash buildup, flooding, lack of snow clearing, pests, lack of heat, and accessibility issues. There were also many general maintenance issues which remained unaddressed. I am a testament to that, regardless of who wants to admit it or not, or agree with it or not. There were things that were done that should have never been done. There were things that were surpassed that should have never been surpassed. And it saddens me that I'm not the only one that is going through this or has gone through this. And it's heartbreaking when people are struggling to live day by day when there's not enough income and you know, there's people taking advantage. And I understand that at a town level, there's nothing that you guys can do when it comes to rent control, but I do urge the town to help next year because the rent control bill fell flat this year, but maybe next year as a town we could come together and support that bill and say this is something that we could do. I believe that positivity can change a lot. Barriers to resolving renters' issues. No response or slow response from landlords, fear of retaliation, which we did have. 8 renters experienced this fear. There's probably more. People just don't want to talk about it. There was 3 retaliation cases that impacted 5 residents. 2 of those residents unfortunately passed away, but that's something that shouldn't be happening. If I bring a valid concern about something happening in a unit that I'm paying rent for, my landlord shouldn't retaliate against me. And I'm not talking about me, but in general, I think that's not okay. Something needs to be done about that. Issues with calling the hotline. town staff were confused about town services for renters and were told that staff were too busy. Not telling landlords. Again, there's people that won't tell the landlords because they simply don't want to deal with the retaliation or the need of waiting, so they rather do it themselves. I met a young lady who, has a Section 8 voucher, and she's fixed things in her unit just to avoid losing her voucher if the person doesn't fix what they need to fix. And that shouldn't be happening. I think that's just wrong. Possible ways to address the issues. Housing stability service. We met with Somerville. We're currently trying to get a hold of Malden because we want to see what their progress in it. A research study to more rigorously document Acton renters' issues. I think that's something that the town really, really needs to work on. Supporting statewide rent control to address rent increase significantly over the rates of inflation and arbitrary fees. A schedule of building inspections and more outreach by the Board of Health. Again, I mentioned this prior to the goal-setting meeting, where I mentioned how it's mind-boggling to me that, we have buildings that have never been inspected, and there's cracks in the foundations, and, there's, like I said, wasp pests going in, and that's due to buildings not being inspected. I'm moving finally, thank God. All my advocacy and all the people that help me advocate. I'm going from Townhouse Lane to Sasham, so I don't have to worry about this so much, but I do want to mention that it's important that we do have building inspection either on yearly base or maybe every 5 years for certain buildings, but they need to happen. There needs to be bylaws that stipulate that building inspections need to happen. My son could fit his head in the guardrail of the 3rd floor of where I currently live, where I'm moving from, and that's not okay. There's these metal spikes sticking out of the ground that I pointed out to one of the health inspectors, who told me, well, why don't you tell your landlord, and then they'll tell us and we'll fix it. I shouldn't have to tell my landlord. If I told you, what is my landlord gonna do? They can't do anything about the outside property. AHA, if they don't own the property, they don't do anything about the outside. So that's one of the reasons why I'm pushing for inspections to be done on buildings. Programs that allow for upgrading buildings and addressing large-scale issues such as mold and pests, and I think the word is called weatherization. Is that how you say it? When I did canvassing at Parker Street, all those plastic bags that were in those windows, and that to me is like a fire violation, like a fire hazard. If there's a fire and the main door to the apartment is blocked, these people are supposed to look in the smoke of their kitchen, let's say, or whatever, to break that thick plastic that's supposed to hold insulation of the windows. That's not okay. In conclusion, we hope that the findings of this report presents a compelling picture of the challenges facing Acton renters. Unfortunately, these findings make it clear that the need for a renter-friendly bylaws and a dedicated housing stability staff position or office to serve this community. We hope that the town will build upon this research, and I also want to emphasize to please remember that housing is a human right. We shouldn't wait for anyone or their families to become homeless to resolve housing issues that are affecting our country. I feel that we have a lot of great things happening in Acton, and as a person who didn't feel belonging before, every day that I'm meeting more and more people after I broke my silence, I'm feeling more of that belonging. And I've met so many incredible people in our community, and I feel that we're heading in the right direction. But in order to complete that, we need to keep in mind that we have to be there for the people that serve us. A lot of our renters work in our supermarkets, work at McDonald's, work at Wendy's, work at Stop and Shop, and we can't forget about our people that make who we are. You know, they bag your groceries, they work at the library, they work at the gas station, and we have to be there for them. We have to represent them. And this is a call, a cry to say enough is enough. Let's break these horrible barriers that were created by our past, you know, politicians or whatever you call them. But I believe that we can make it happen. We could be an example for the rest of the country if we put our minds to it. And again, thank you for this opportunity.
I also just wanted to say that a lot of people assume that now that COVID is over, even though it's not over, that the renters are fine, like we've gotten our assistance, and if we needed it. You know, Joe Biden just said in a speech on the federal level that inflation has caused another crisis for renters, and that's being looked at and identified and taken seriously for funding for renters. And it's also been talked about on a state level. Channel 5 recently did an expose on renters in Massachusetts and struggles that they're dealing with, and many of the struggles that were in that segment are also ones that we're talking about today. And so I just want to kind of also contextualize that that we're going through some tough things, and these are things that are being reflected on a state and federal level as well. So we really appreciate your attention to our canvassing report and our remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments from the board? Jim.
I'm looking forward to being able to send people links to the report and to the, you know, the slides. So as soon as they show up on, you know, DocuShare or wherever, I'm looking forward to being able to get the word out. And thanks so much for giving us this version of it. It means a lot to hear it in person, because there's that extra heart impact. Thank you.
Fran.
Thank you so much for doing the work, too. I mean, that was a lot of reaching out that you did. And I look forward to seeing the slides and working with you, Madeline. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Imogen.
Thank you. It's truly extraordinary to see the efforts that you put in to reach out to the community. The results were really interesting to learn more about, and I look forward to also sharing the report. I think that, you know, as part of our long-term goals, we did mention that we want to work with the Human Services Committee to develop recommendations that support renters. I'm really excited that that's going to be going forward. I think that we're also, you know, in general, really wanting to support renters, and so feedback like this really helps. It's something that we take seriously. It's something I take seriously. So just really want to thank you again for the effort, and it's just also just so incredible to see how close this group has grown, and how everyone has learned to support each other. And you know, I think that your group is not only a testament to kind of the great committees that we have in town, but also just the community you're able to foster within Acton around these issues. So just many thanks.
Thank you, and you're welcome.
David.
Yes, thank you. I'm also looking forward to seeing the report, I want to figure out how we go about doing the short-term goal of you know, what we need to do to implement, you know, town-wide standards. And you know, there's a lot of work there to figure out, what's possible and what we need to do.
Thank you. Mr. Manager, what's the best way that the documents that the committee has put together can be made public? Can we put that in the packet for this agenda? I wouldn't want to have it as a standalone document on the town website because it was not something produced by Town Resources, but I think it'd be interesting for folks to be able to access these documents.
Yeah, a lot of times information presented at a meeting, we put into the extra information folder, which is in the DocuShare associated with tonight's meeting. And so we can upload it to there tomorrow. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Well, I want to thank you folks for all the work you've done and for coming in. And it's obviously, this is something that's attracted a great deal of attention from the board, as witnessed by the fact that it's on our list of goals. And I'm sure it'll be an ongoing conversation. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Have a great night.
All right, our next item is discussing safety measures on the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. Just as a bit of background, I think most members of the board are aware of this. There was a recent accident in North Acton with a pedestrian being struck by a bicyclist. And it just seemed fortunate that the person was injured but is in recovery. The possibility the individual might be calling in on Zoom at some point during the meeting. So I figured it was worthwhile just to sort of touch base on any issues we might have with with safety. And we have an expert here from the Friends of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail.
There we go. My name is Paul Malchotti. I live on Shady Lane, and I wouldn't call myself an expert. In fact, I put my computer on the corner of the sink in the men's room on the way here, and it got an automatic washing, and it no longer works. So I have a presentation, but I don't have it electronically. Is it possible you could flash the slides, John, or do you just want me to talk through it?
Yeah, I can try to track it down.
All right, thank you. So I know we had a couple of hands raised. Would you like me to do my presentation first before we address them?
Yeah, yes, I would.
Okay, thank you. So I want to talk about rail trail safety considerations in general and rail trails on a broader scale first, then rail trail safety considerations, and a little bit about the specific incident that we are talking about. I apologize for the lack of graphics in my presentation. I can do graphics. Anybody who wants to grade me on my graphics, I'll give you a graphic presentation some other time. Rail trails are linear parks. Next, please. They're linear parks. People don't think of them that way, but people in our organization view them as parks, public parks. They just happen to have a linear character shape. They're built along current or formal railroads. There are both, and we are advocating in many places for extensions along both. Nationwide, there's over 2,300 rail trails, a total of over 25,000 open miles of rail trail, and 800 more are in process as we meet tonight, totaling over 9,000 additional miles, and there's hundreds more in the advocacy stage. Acton has portions of 2 rail trails at this time, the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail and the Assabet River Rail Trail. And each of these has significant additional connection and extension possibilities in our community and to communities around us. One thing about rail trails I like to say is that rail trails are many things to many people. Next, please. By many things to many people, rail trails add value to our community in many ways. Everyone who goes to a park, if you go to Nara on a busy summer Saturday, you'll find people doing one thing at the beach, another thing at the pavilion, another thing at the ice cream stand, another thing on the sports fields, another thing in the auditorium, all at the same time. Rail trails are similar to that in that people in the same space can be there for exercise, they can be there to get away, to get to nature, they can be there to be with friends, they can be there just to go somewhere, they can be there to meet someone, they can be there for a large number of purposes, and they're all valid. As with any public park, all these purposes are valid. They're all good uses of public space. That's why we have recreation managing the rail trail right now. So in the same place at the same time, we have people who are there to be, I want to be me, I want to just experience this park, this beautiful place, or I want to be together with friends. We have people who are along the trail to experience it one tree at a time. People are along the trail because they want to get somewhere, because they want to go somewhere or explore something. People are out just to take some fresh air, and other people side by side them are trying to get fit. I was out on the trail Saturday, and there was a guy jogging in the heat of the afternoon with a 30-pound backpack on. And I said, well, these are all valid uses. But one key element of rail trails is that they are a magnet for bicycles. Because they are the grades are very shallow, typically less than 3%. Typically they're 10 to 12 feet wide. They are almost perfect for bicycles, and bicycles are the reason many rail trails exist, because bicycle advocacy has created a demand for rail trails nationwide. Creating rail trails takes not just advocacy though, it takes interest commitment, time commitment, and money. The Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, people have been working on it since the mid-1980s, and it's still only about 2/3 done. So it's a big long-term project, takes a long time, a lot of commitment and a lot of money. Most of the money for most rail trails nationwide has come through alternative transportation funding from the federal government. That has some interesting aspects to it, but the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail is really the primary funding reason is because it provides an alternative commuter connection to the West Concord Railroad Station. And that's an important thing to think about going forward, and as people think about how to manage the trail and trail rules. As with any public park, we have to have ways to share the public park space. People in the park who are using the park have to recognize that while their use is what they're there for, other people have legitimate uses that are as important as theirs, that are completely different from theirs. And that's not always something people remember. When you go to a park, they say, well, I'm going to the sports fields at Manor because everybody at Manor plays sports, and not everybody at Manor plays sports. There's people walking peacefully around the track, around the loop around it at the same time. Rail trails come with an additional difficulty, though, because of the nature of them, because they're long and narrow, and because some people are using them to get somewhere and some people are using them for exercise, there's a kind of natural, there's a lot of paths that cross on the rail trail at the same time. On a given day, there may be 1,000 people at Nara. There's probably 1,000 people on the rail trail, on the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail on the same nice summer day, except the people on the rail trail are interacting with people constantly. And it creates situations you don't get in a public park, except in some limited situations. It's a natural and constant set of interactions at different speeds and with different momentum. And those are things that really affect trail safety when you start to think about how to make the trail a safe place. It's a little bit different than a public park. Rail trails share some characteristics with roads, and people sometimes think of them as roads, but it's really, look at the trail as a park. Look at it as a place to go in the woods, or ride your bike in the woods, or walk in the woods, or stand in the woods, or sit in the woods and enjoy things. You get a much better view of the rail trail when you think of it that way. It's not a highway, it's not a road, it's a linear park. But as a park, rail trails share characteristics with other parks. You know, think about 3 families go for a picnic together and they all spread their blankets out and spread their food out, and then suddenly the 4 10-year-olds in the group start tossing a frisbee around, and they knock over the ketchup and step on the hamburgers. The same kind of thing happens in a rail trail constantly, all the time, because there's an immense amount of interaction. You're trying to have different people do different things in the same space. So how do we approach safety on that? We have to look and understand who the users are and how they view their place in the world. You can't make rules that people aren't going to understand. They have to be simple and straightforward, easy to follow rules. And we can't legislate manners. We say this, we say be nice. It'd be great to put up a sign that says be nice. But what's it going to do for us? That's what we really want people to do, is to think about other people and to be nice to other people. one of the important things about a rail trail is that, as with a road, we need to have common rules as we go along it. We can't have one set of rules in Westford and one set of rules in Chelmsford and one set of rules in Carlisle, the 900 feet in Carlisle, one set of rules in Acton and another in West Concord and another in Sudbury. That'd be a disaster from having understanding and sticking with the idea that we need to have our users thinking about their use of the trail in a safe way. It's very important for them to think about use of the trail in a safe way. So if we have common rules, simple rules based on people's understanding of the trail, that will help. Some people have said we should design the trail to be safer. There's things we can do with the technical design of the trail. And while there's some difficulties with that, and I'll give you one example, and that is our number one safety concern on any rail trail is the trail user stepping out in front of a car or rolling the bike out in front of a car. And it happens occasionally around the country. You hear about them, you read about them. And the reason it's number one is that the consequences are so great. When you think about safety issues, you have to think about what's the likelihood of this happening and what are the consequences of this. And the consequence of rolling out in front of a car are immense. And so people for years tried to say, okay, right before every road intersection, we're going to make the trail go through a tight S curve. A chicane is what the auto racers call it. Or we're going to put a block there and make them make a hard right turn and a hard left turn. And that seems to reduce the number of people who roll out into the street without thinking about it. And then we get an immense number of people running into the fence. And so we get a whole nother set of injuries from building a chicane into the rail trail. So people have stopped building chicanes into the rail trails and tried to do other things in the streets. It's part of why we in the Friends Group funded the automation of Acton's 5 street crossings, the automation of the safety lights at Acton's 5 street crossings, because we're concerned about that. So simple rules that take users' minds into concern. What's our biggest safety problem? We've got the issue I just mentioned, people rolling out in the streets. The second level of safety problem is people running head-on into each other on bicycles. And that's why trails went from being 8 feet wide, which they were 40 years ago, to being 10 feet wide at least, because the risk of people running head-on into each other was too significant. So the third thing is what I want to talk about tonight, and that's how do we convey to people the idea that slower users have the right of way? When we look at the letter that was written to the select board, it really sounds like a case of a faster user not granting the slower user the right of way, when you boil that down. And the important rule there is the slower user always has the right of way. And the corollary that goes with that is that the faster user who would love to pass the slower user can only pass them when it's safe to do so. And this is a hard thing on all of us. You get on the roadway and there's a mail truck dropping them off mail at every mailbox, and you're driving up behind it and you go to pass it. And half the time I see people, they'll drive around the mail truck even knowing that they're slowing down a car coming towards them on the other side of the road. And they don't have the right of way at that point. At that point, the mail truck has the right of way in front of them and the oncoming car has the right of way on the other side of the roadway. It's the same on rail trails. That's the goal, is to get people to understand that. And it's not something we can teach people. It's not something we can do with signage. We've tried. Other people have tried. On the roadway we see signs now that say bicycle may use full lane. What that's really saying is the slower user has the right of way and oncoming traffic has the full right to its lane at any time. We see signs pass only when safe to do so. You'll see those regularly on rail trails. We can say that, but people don't. It doesn't get into people's heads. And so we're wrestling with how to make users understand that that slow person in front of them has the right of way. So I underline it in the presentation. The rule that we have to get into people's heads is we must slow to the speed of those in front of us until it's safe to pass, and oncoming traffic has the right to use their lane. We don't. And on any given day, if you drive around, you'll see drivers not doing this. On any rail trail, you'll see people who want to go 8 miles an hour backed up behind people who want to go 6 miles an hour, backed up behind people who want to go 4 miles an hour, backed up behind people who want to stand still. And I want to go back to something I said 6 slides ago. These are all legitimate natural uses of this public park. So it's not something we can complain about. We have to honor the people in front of us. their use is as valid as ours. And that's the real message we want to convey to people, is we want them to see and honor the usage, that other people's uses are valid as theirs. And so it's something we struggle with a lot. One piece of the puzzle is we address the public concern of the individual who wrote the selectmen, is that it's difficult for most trail users. And I don't know if you spent any time on trails. I spend a few dozen hours a year on trails, let's put it that way at least. The experience most trail users have is universally good. The trail is a conduit of goodwill. People enjoying their day, relaxing, getting some fresh air, getting exercise, going for a bike ride, a run, a walk, whatever it is they do, meeting up with friends. It's a conduit of goodwill. It's the artery of goodwill around the community, if you will. And they don't understand that all it takes is one person out of 10,000 to make somebody's day go bad. And those are really low odds. You know, if we have 1,000 users a day and we have 20 busy days in the summer, there's 20,000 users on those days. All it takes is one person doing the wrong thing. And so that's something we can't fix. We can't manage it. In the presentation, I included something, though. You know, the message I like to give to people is everybody else's usage of the trail is just as legitimate as yours. It's not a walking trail. It's not a bicycle trail. It's not a jogging trail. It's not a nature trail. It's all of these things. And they're all legitimate uses. And so when you see somebody complaining, here's something I picked off of Facebook yesterday while I was researching for this presentation in the Acton Parents Group, somebody complaining about other users on the trail, bitterly complaining that the people in front of them were slow in a large group. And I'm saying, you don't get it. Their use is just as valid as yours. That large group has the same public park usage rights as you do. And yet it's common, and we hear this complaint a lot. I get it in emails addressed to me, you know, what can you do about people walking slow when these large groups of people filling a whole trail? And I'm saying to myself, I love it when large groups of people are on the trail. That's what we want, is people using the trail. It's their park. It should make us happy. So I want to get back to the safety issue, though. The writer requested two things. The writer said, hey, let's have speed limits, let's enforce them. Maybe the writer requested several things. Let's have speed limits, let's enforce them, let's arrest people, let's divide the trail up into 4 lanes. Let's talk about those things one at a time. One is speed limits. Most trail users don't know how fast they're going. So you can say slow down, or your speed limit's 15 miles an hour, but that doesn't sink in, and the signs go right by and nobody notices them. The only signs I've ever seen that people noticed and talked about afterwards and said, how fast am I going, are signs that have fractional speed limits. So when the speed limit sign says 15 and a half or 13 and 3/4 miles an hour, people notice it and they complain bitterly about it. And that gets their attention. It helps them focus on, what am I doing to be safe? You know, it's like the sign that says, be nice. It gets people's attention. It's a surprise sign. It's not a rule. It just says, be nice. $200 fine if you're not nice. I don't know. So that kind of thing works. If we get people's attention, it'll improve our safety level. But again, we don't want to have rules that are one thing in one town and one thing and a different thing in another town. What about lane markings? In many places, you'll see center line markings on a trail, indicating this is our side of the trail and the other side is for people going the other way. And every trail safety sign that has words on it says slower users keep right. Absolutely everyone. Faster users pass on the left. And then there's usually a whole host of other rules. Lane markings can help on a trail in some places. They're before every intersection on the current phases of the trail. There's a 50-yard long lane marking. And many avid cyclists prefer lane markings the whole length of the trail. They want to have that indicated center line. But what that does is it makes the trail seem more like a highway. So when the town if the town looks at or just tries to talk about lane markings, you really have to think about what's the character of the public park that you're going to create by putting lane markings in place. And that's got to be that's the one thing that can be a town by town decision, though we'd prefer the design of the trail be the same along its whole length, just as the rules should be the same along its whole length. Because the trail is being built in essentially 5 phases or 6 phases, There are different design criteria at the time of each phase construction. So as you go from Lowell through Westford, Chelmsford into Acton, you'll see some changes in design. The section in West Concord has different design than the new section going up over the Route 2. And the Sudbury section will have yet another set of design criteria just because of the evolution of design guidelines. So lane markings are a possibility. They can tell you where the middle of the trail is if the trail is clean, but our trail often has leaves or pine flowers or oak flowers in the spring, and in the summertime there's dust on it, so they're not always clear and legible. But we have to, before we decide on lane markings, we need to think about what's the consequence of having lane markings in terms of the appearance of the trail and the experience of the park, the walk in the woods experience. What does it become when we have lane markings? What about separating pedestrians from cyclists? The letter writer asked, gee, can we separate pedestrians from cyclists? And we could. We've got to think about the width of the trail. The trail is 10 feet wide. If a cyclist typically needs a 5-foot lane and you need about a foot of lane space between people, cyclists going in opposite directions, and the pedestrian needs about a 42-inch, 3.5-foot wide path with about 6 inches lane space. So if you have a 19-foot wide path, you can easily make 4 lanes. Less than that, and you're going to start to constrain one or the other of the users to be unsafe within their own space. So lane separation could be done. I was talking with Tom Tidman. He and I both think that we need to do something for the 100-yard stretch of the trail that's shared with the rail trail and the Narrow Park circular walkway, that there's a problem there we need to address, principally caused by the fact that the trail comes downhill into that section. There's a drop, and one thing, if you get people on bicycles, they do a lot of work to go up hills and they want to enjoy their downhills, right? And that's where we're talking about how do we get people to slow down there and maybe dismount? Well, no one's ever going to dismount. We found in West Concord, when we asked people to dismount to make the crossing the street and the rail track safer, we get 0 compliance. That's, I think, the current rate. So no one's going to walk their bikes. So we need to do something there. I don't know what the answer is. The railroad right away, by the way, that the trail is built on is 66 feet wide at least, and along its entire length. People say, oh, it's a 10-foot wide trail. There's a lot of land there. Much of it couldn't be expanded onto. In the particular section next to Nara, the rail bed goes through Rex Lumber. So we don't have the rail trail anyway. It's just a temporary land swap. While Rex Lumber is in business, we get to use they'll wrap around their property and they get to keep the contiguous nature of their operation. So there is land there. Not everywhere could you expand that land because the railroads built the rail beds through water because they like to have water for their steam engines. As I said, I think the most important set of rules we need on a rail trail is to have common rules along the entire length of it, and common signage and common markings. In 2007, before any of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail was built, the Friends group that I'm a part of coordinated a multi-town meeting to decide on common rules along the length of the trail, and we got Chelmsford and Westford and Lowell and Concord all to go and participate and agree on a set of rules and what the sign should look like. And Acton missed the meeting, and when the trail was built in Acton, Acton funded on its own different signs with different rules. And the rules signs were much more complicated and included some technical errors. In addition to being different from other towns, they included too many words and technical errors. I like to say that signs with more than 3 words on them, no one's going to read. And if you see the current rules when you drive into Nara and get out of your car to use the rail trail, right by the kiosk, there's an Acton Town Rules sign, and it's got to have 300 words on it. And no one is ever going to read it, I promise you. So if we have rules on rail trails, they need to be simple, they need to be straightforward and obvious. The signage needs to be eye-catching and attention-getting. They need to be common for all the towns and the whole length of the rail trail if possible. We are about to sponsor another common rules meeting. I don't know the date of it yet, but something happened in West Concord where 2 different groups in the Concord town government put up 2 different rule signs along the rail trail. And it woke somebody up and said, hey, wait a minute, we got a different set of rule signs in Acton, a different set of rule signs in West Concord, and towards Commonwealth Avenue, and a different set of rules signs in Chelmsford and Lowell. We need to have another multi-town common rules meeting and let a representative from each town get together and talk about and iron out common trail rules, come up with a common rules sign, and put them on the whole trail. And the Friends Group has offered to pay for those signs and pay for the installation of them. We'll do that to try and get consistent, safe usage of the trail. Enforcement is another important question that the letter writer brought up. Enforcement can do some good things, but it's very difficult. You know, you talk to the public safety personnel. When you try to enforce rules on a rail trail, you first have to decide what rules are you enforcing. You know, do I stand by the kiosk behind Donnellan's and watch people roll through the stop sign and say, hey, you rolled through the stop sign? Because both the rail trail users coming up the streets are supposed to stop. And how many of them really stop, come to a full stop? Zero. So, but if the vast majority of them, if you watch for a while, you'll see they slow down enough that they could stop if they needed to. And I've sat there and watched. The most people get to the point where they could stop if they needed to. Some don't, head down, they just shoot through the intersection and hope it goes well. But do you set a speed limit and try to enforce that? You enforce the rules. There's rules about motorized vehicles. How do we enforce those? You know, if somebody brings a moped on the rail trail, how do we enforce that? There's been a number of incidents where there's a person with a heavily motorized automated unicycle rolling down the trail at 26 miles an hour. What do we do about that? There's consideration in the state legislature is talking about what to do about that, but I'm not optimistic that we're going to get an improvement in the state law, which currently is confusing about that kind of device. We'd like to have the towns that have the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail running through them have a common set of rules. We'd like to have common signage. And if that includes speed limit signs and yield signs and slower users have the right-of-way signs, that's great. If some of the signs are Burma shave style, those seem to be effective. They get people's attention. But having excessively wordy signs doesn't help. I think that my colleague here handed me, this is what the original rules sign looked like that was agreed to in 2007. Simple, short words. But even this is too many words to look at when you're moving. You need to have this in at the access points. But the idea was to keep it as few rules as possible with as few words as possible and make it simple for people. There's a lot of other issues, secondary issues and concerns, but I think that from perspective of safety, I would ask that Acton actively participate in the upcoming Common Rules meeting, and whoever comes from Acton brings to the table would be great. The other towns will appreciate it. I'm not saying they'll love it, because towns like to think that they're better than the towns around them. We certainly do. So that's all I brought. Oh, I'm sorry, let me go to the last slide. Couple of thoughts. Many of the signs put into Acton have been stolen, and I'm going to bring that up with our group to talk about what we do about that. It turns out the signs were not security bolted on. They were easy to take down, and this apparently group of people who have decided they're so some of the safety signs are missing. Welcome to different places signs are missing. Entering and leaving the rail trail signs are missing. A substantial number are missing. There are difficulties with enforcement. What do our public safety personnel do if we ask them to enforce? Where do they go and how do they do it? That all needs to be thought out carefully, and I'm sure there's ways to do it. It's a question of whether the town wants to commit resources to that kind of thing. It can help, I think, to have a public safety presence and certain days and times on the trail, just like if you have a big event at NARA. We have a big event at NARA, we want a public safety presence. It can help when we're busy on the rail trail too, for sure. There are formal engineering studies on these questions, and I wasn't able to find any in the research I did that were specifically relevant to this set of topics. I spent a lot of time looking through how to design shared use street paths, safety stuff, because of the searches I did. My commitment to my own group is to find some of these specific, what do you do on the rail trail to enhance safety studies? And I'll make those available to you. The letter writer's letter expressed their experience on the trail in a way that most people who see it, who use the trail a lot, have trouble understanding, because it doesn't agree with our own vision of how we experience the trail. But we have to take the letter writer's letter at face value, I think. There's nothing to say that there's any other way to take it. So we have to address it saying, this is what happened. How do we deal with that situation? And we think that having common rules, easy to understand rules, is the way to go. Helping people to understand, somehow crack that. If we can go from 1 in 10,000 people being bad to 1 in 50,000, it's 4 fewer accidents out of 5. And that's the kind of thing we need to do. You break through that the brain goodness barrier that some people seem to have. So, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. Comments from the board? Jim.
Well, thank you, and it was informative, and I learned stuff. My conclusion is we need to make sure to have an Acton presence at the next rule and signage event. Yeah, that's it.
David.
Yes, thank you. That was I really enjoyed all your information. The most dangerous thing I've seen on the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail is a couple of people walking. They were kind of walking towards the center, and a bicyclist came by and passed them on the left much faster than they were walking. But there was a bicyclist behind that bicycle that the first bicycle wasn't going fast enough. He passed the 2 people on the right at the same time. And, or just a second or 2 after. And I was like, because I thought the people were going to be surprised by the first cyclist, jump right, and then be hit by the second cyclist. Fortunately, that didn't happen. They didn't get hit or anything. But I think, the 2 rules that I think are important is to pass only on the left and to keep right if you're not passing. And that, as you say, it's not that if you're walking with 8 people that you can't take the entire trail. Sometimes, right? You're going for a walk after Thanksgiving dinner. Well, maybe that's too dark. Before Thanksgiving dinner. And that's, with the family that showed up, you might take the trail. But you have to be considerate of people. But I think that the 2 most important rules are to keep right and you're not passing, and keep left when you're passing. Thank you.
Imogen.
Yeah, very quickly, I agree with everyone's points. For me, I think the best solution would be to potentially consider a bike lane, just so that we do have a separation of people who are walking or running and people who are on their bikes. But that said, like you said, we don't want to make it seem like it's a highway. But in terms of nominating someone to represent Acton at these meetings, I don't know if that would be something that one of us select board members should do, or town manager, or maybe someone from our committees who might be appropriate. But I do think it's important that we do have some representation there.
Thank you.
I'll just add, in addition to the safety signs, I'm all for those simple, and a few be nice, be kind signs thrown in would be great too.
All right, I believe we have at least one person in the audience, Ruth, that would like to speak.
Yes, she is unmuted.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes,
So
we can.
This accident happened on June 20th. We're both senior citizens. We were walking, looking for a leisurely stroll. We entered the trail from the corner of Route 27 and 225 at the parking lot. And we stepped cautiously into the trail. There was a group of about 5 or 6 bicycles from our left speeding, going very, very quickly. We paused, waited for them to pass. They were hugging the right side of the road. So once they passed, we looked right and left, nobody else, no other bicycles were coming. And we just started to walk and following in their path. And next thing we knew, Another group of bicycles were coming in the opposite direction.
At high speed.
At very high speed. And so we walked in the center, very consciously walking in a straight line, not zigzagging or anything like that. And we had only been there maybe 5 minutes when this accident happened. Out of nowhere came this bike from behind me, hit me in the back. He tipped over, I landed on his wheel and then on my back. I have 3 broken ribs, which are going to take between 6 to 8 weeks to heal. I'm far from being healed, contrary to what you mentioned earlier. And I'd like to take issue with Paul McCarty, is that his name, the presenter. He talks about you can't legislate manners. Well, going through a red light when you're driving a car is not a question of manner. It's safety and it's regulation. And if you draw an analogy between bicyclists going as fast as they wish and treating pedestrians as impediments to their pleasure, then by the same token, you can say, oh, let them go through red lights too. They have poor manners. We can't legislate manners. The presenter also talked about the slower moving entity has the right of way. Well, obviously pedestrians are slower moving than bicycles. I would propose signs saying something like yield to pedestrians. I've had a change of heart since writing this letter because bicyclists don't know how many miles per hour they're traveling. But if you have frequent signs reminding them to yield to pedestrians, I think that would have a big psychological impact on their behavior. And may I point out that in Lexington on the Minuteman Trail, at least at the intersection of Hancock Street, which we saw today, we were driving, there is a yellow stripe down the middle. And that's what I was proposing. And I think this presenter, the way he presented it, 2 things. Number one, he's overcomplicated it. It's not rocket science. When you have a 10-foot path, just split it down the middle, 5 and 5, and the bicyclists can figure out for themselves when they see an oncoming bicycle, how to remain safe for themselves. And the other point I had was, no, I am not advocating 10 rules, just simple 3-word sign, to use his guideline of 3 words, yield to pedestrians. That's all. It's not a question of manners. It's a question of regulation and the law and safety above all. We're not there for them to have it's not a race course. And they were going, I would estimate, at least 15, 20 miles an hour. And my husband, Tom, wants to talk.
Yes, thank you very much for allowing us to share our perspective. Along with my wife, I found the presenter's presentation disappointing. He's complicated. He's overcomplicated a fairly simple not an entirely simple situation, but this is something that requires common sense, not engineering studies. Common sense, not engineering studies. Your neighboring town, Carlisle, has a cranberry bog that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's a little bit complicated because the trail around the bog is very narrow, and a lot of people go there to walk their dogs. You walk up to the bog, there are 2 big signs there with very simple rules that are laid out so people can negotiate this complex situation. At that particular parking lot where we entered the trail, it would be very easy for the town to create a signage with some very basic rules, I think, that would perhaps alleviate the situation. With respect to the notion that the presenter was talking about in terms of lanes, let me just reinforce my wife's comment that here we were on this trail, and these bikers were going fast, let me tell you, in groups, zooming down. We got on that trail, we said, wait a minute, do we even want to be here? You don't want elderly people to go on a nature walk and say, do we even want to be here? So, and the bikers, here's the salient point. The bikers were hugging the outside of the trail in both directions. in both directions. We looked down, we saw them coming, and they forced us to the middle, and that's why my wife was hit. Okay, so they're basically herding the pedestrians to the center. That seems to me to just suggest that you really need some kind of lane management there. I don't know of any other solution to that.
And one more last comment, please. As I was lying down on the pavement, flat on my back, in agony, I might add, my husband called 911. And by the way, the first responders were fantastic. I want to compliment the town on them. While I was lying there, more bicycles kept whizzing by, 10 inches from my head. I was so terrified that I'm going to get hit a second time. Now, that's not manners. There's got to be enforced regulation there. People have to behave humanly, not like robots on a bicycle.
So we do, once again, we very much appreciate being able to offer our perspective. And again, I'm disappointed in the presentation because it's common sense. I see one very simple solution is putting up some signage that people are just going to run into as they enter the trail, and let them know, sure, yield to pedestrians. You know, to us, that seems like a fairly simple solution. So thanks again for letting us speak.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate you bringing this to our attention. Some great input. Certainly on behalf of the board, I wish you a quick recovery and hope that you'll take a chance and come out on our trails again. Is there anybody else out there? Okay, we got Amber.
Amber Clower, Piper Road. I have a question about the blinking lights. Do they come on automatically when someone approaches, the runners or the walkers or whatever, riders approach?
The way the lights are set up now, at the 5 street crossings in Acton, they're supposed to turn on automatically as people approach, and they remain on for 30 seconds after they're initially turned on. So it takes about 6 seconds for bicyclists traveling moderately to get from initiating a light to get across the intersection, about 10 to 12 seconds for a pedestrian to get across. But they are automated. There are 2 of them, 2 of the 10, there's 10 sensors. 2 of the 10 sensors have a problem that I've got to write to Corey about, because they're also triggering on departures. I need to have them reset, but they're by and large, they're working. At least they were when I was there Saturday.
That's what I noticed. It was doing it when people were leaving and you don't know, stop, go. I just sat there for a while and irritated the man behind me, but I was doing the right thing, of course.
Some of that is because they're on for 30 seconds and that might be too long. It's really Corey's decision as the Public Works Director how long it should be on for. But if it takes, it might take a slow pedestrian 13 or 14 seconds to get from initiating it to it being across the street. So that how much longer than that they flash is really his decision.
Thank you. I also have a question because the lady's not there anymore, but I hope someone tried to help her rather than just whizzing by her. Kind people would stop and give her some help, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. One more.
Emily Teller, Westford board member and member of the Friends of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. It's great to have John here because we worked together in Westford before he came here with the rail trail. I think Paul's presentation tonight was so long because I think it's a long time before you all as a governing body need to think about the rail trail from time to time. And I'm very sorry about this elderly woman's accident. I think nobody minimizes what happened to her that day. And I think it's very, very difficult when an accident does happen. I think the more people that use the rail trail, obviously the odds of accidents go up. And as Paul has said, I think there really is not a way that we can legislate safety. We can legislate kindness, and hopefully we can put up some signs. I do want to say that the Friends of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail will pay for signage. The ones that are stolen, we had that at the beginning in Westford, and we paid for replacement signs, so that's not a problem for us at all. And I think the installers do put in better bolts. Maybe that will help. But I also wanted to say that my husband rides the rail trail every 2 days, and he does the entire length to the bridge. He's 75, and he has a trike, which is a little wider than a bike. And he and a friend who ride often, they stop all the time when somebody has stopped, no matter what reason, and they offer to help. And there have been days when they've replaced 3 tires and, helped with chains and things like that. So I think there is a culture of kindness on the rail trail. I also want to report that he's telling me, and I rode from our house near Carlisle line up to Hart Pond and back with my 10-year-old granddaughter on Saturday to swim in Hart Pond, and my husband came too. Very few people are saying anything or making any noise or ringing a bell when they're passing on the left. And I think we as rail trail board members are always, when we're using the trail, trying to model that and are saying, passing left or hello, or I'll say passing left and somebody's behind me. But again, and I think I can't remember, somebody recently said maybe we should pass out bells. We should just stand and pass out bells for bikes. We just have to model, and we have to keep up the communication. We put stuff in our newsletters all the time about, be kind, yield to pedestrians. And I just want to say I appreciate you very much hearing tonight. We did want to uniformly have all the crossing equipment from Lowell through to the end of Acton uniform, and that's why we paid for the automatic safety crossing equipment. We also funded a study for Corey to do, to have somebody study the best practices for those intersections. I don't know that we've gotten that information yet, but we want to be a partner with the town. We want to support what's best for your decision-making with your section, and also to make it uniform so that people who pass through town to town can do so seamlessly. I brought some extra newsletters tonight, if anybody needs them, and thank you for your time. That's all. And if you have any questions, I can answer some too, maybe.
Thank you. And thank you, Paul. It was a great presentation that you put together on very short notice. We appreciate it. Mr. Manager, can you make sure that we alert Corey and the offer about the signage and look what we can do to improve safety out there? And I don't know if Recreation Commission should be involved in this, or if it's more of a public works function, but I'll leave that up to you. But I'd like to make sure we do some follow-up on this and take advantage of the opportunity to unify the signage moving forward. We're probably going to have a lot more use out there once that next section going into West Concord becomes legally open. So, very exciting. Thank you. Item 10, approve amended town manager contract. I think we've all seen the changes, the amendments that were made. I think they're all consistent with the discussions that we had. John?
Yes, I don't know which version that you've seen, but there was a sentence that was removed in council's review that I'd like to not be removed. I don't think it's substantive, but it's important to me. It's regarding volunteering. It would be, my computer died, but it is, I think in, the third. Actually, it's in section 1A, the last sentence. If you don't have it, then I guess, I don't know what to say. But.
Hey, Jim.
Yeah, it seems to have slipped not into our packet somehow.
Okay.
Yeah. So what can we do? Was it mailed to us at some point?
I suppose we can try again next meeting, as long as you'll keep me here in the meantime.
Yeah.
I'm a little embarrassed by the whole thing. Certainly, I think the edits that I saw going forward looked good and appropriate, but, this latest issue that you brought up, I don't have any knowledge of it at all, so I think I'd probably feel more comfortable if we make sure that we get the finalized version to us as quickly as possible, and we'll vote on it at our next meeting. David?
I would like to see that, having not read it, but unless there's something onerous in it, the line allowing the manager to volunteer elsewhere to be in the contract. So, I know that he volunteers in a number of different areas, and I think that's important. And so, unless there's some reason not to have it there, I'd like to see that in the final version.
Yeah, I think that's entirely reasonable.
It's not new language. It's language from the last 4 years. In one of the reviews, it was stricken for some reason. I'm just asking that it not be. I think it was just, in any event, I think it can certainly be discussed at your next meeting. I'm comfortable with that.
Thank you.
I think it's going to be a very routine vote, but I think reading the body language here, I think folks want to take one last look at it. All right, we'll move on. Consent items. Item 11, approve meeting minutes May 9th, 16th, June 27th, 2022. Approve executive session minutes June 6, 22, 27, 2022. Approve request for use of town roads, Ride to Defeat ALS, September 18th, 2022. Approve request for use of town roads, Ride for Live, Run for Live, July 24th, 2022. Approve one-day alcoholic beverage license, Jessica Giraldo, Narrow Park Picnic Pavilion, August 7th, 2022. 16, approve one-day alcoholic beverage license, New England Mayoli Association, Narrow Park Picnic Pavilion, July 16th, 2022. Number 17, approve one-day alcoholic beverage license, Vikas Lal Mayori Indian Cuisine, July 16th, 2022. Approve Adopt a Street program application for Rahul Matri, Central Street from Main Street to Summer Street. Item 19, committee appointment, Amy Green, full member, Conservation Commission, term to expire June 30th, 2025. Number 20, accept gift recreation department for $250 from Nizi Thandi to support a dog park in Acton. Item 21, accept gift recreation department for $100 from Kristen Kohler to support a dog park in Acton. Number 22, sign license application reimbursement request, Planning Division, $45 from Village Crossing Condominiums. I will accept a motion to approve consent items 11 through 22 inclusive.
So moved.
Got a second?
I'll second.
Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Approved unanimously. I am looking for one more motion.
I move to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you very much. We're adjourned.